"Young master," Christopher called out with an excited look on his face, then urged his Warzer black hound to run toward the 7-year-old. However, when he saw Zion raise his finger to cover his lips, Christopher immediately zipped his mouth, not letting out a single sound. He understood that his master didn't want him to divulge what he gained at the moment, but that didn't stop him from feeling very happy. Christopher simply hugged 13, making the 7-year-old sigh. However, he didn't make any move to push him away, allowing his right-hand man to share his happiness with him. A moment later, another monster joined the group hug, and it was none other than Giga Chad, who reverted back to his original form. The Chad skunk even groaned a bit and pointed at his shoulder, which was riddled with bite marks, before looking at the two kids with a pitiful expression on his face. 13 then handed Christopher a bottle of healing potion, which the chubby boy carefully poured over Giga Chad's injuries. Of course, he also took out a healing potion of his own and poured on Giga Chad's other injuries. While Christopher was doing this, a notification appeared beside 13, congratulating him for clearing his 4th mission. Unique quest. Quest category: Chain quest. Quest name: The 13 Trials. First trial completed. Escape the Houdini Desert. Second trial completed. Find a 5-leaf clover. Third trial completed. Make the purple-furred honey badger your ally. Reward: the honey badger won't attack you and your group from now on. Fourth trial completed. Defeat the rank 6 overlord, diabolical hyena. Reward: you will gain a one-time ability that will prevent you from dying from any attack that can instantly kill you. Fifth trial. Convince the purple-furred honey badger to fight alongside you against the forces of the Magian Prince. Reward: you will know the whereabouts of the secret stash of the diabolical hyena. 13 arched an eyebrow after looking at the reward of his 5th trial. He was quite curious what the secret stash of the diabolical hyena was, so this was something that he couldn't pass up. Besides, he had long thought of convincing Cranky to fight alongside them when the Magian Prince arrived, so this trial was only a bonus for him. But, just as he was about to go to the purple-furred honey badger so that they could talk, a hateful roar spread in the surroundings. "And we here," Percival roared as he attacked his stepbrother without a second thought. The Tigerkin's hands and feet were still bathed in golden flames, making 13 arch an eyebrow. Anwar, who was mounted on top of a saber-toothed tiger, raised his right hand to stop his men from attacking Percival, who was charging in their direction like a crazed tiger, hungry for blood. Anwar snorted and jumped off from his mount and charged forward as well. The two brothers clashed against each other, resulting in a shockwave that made the two of them skid several meters away from each other. "I will not forgive you, you traitor," Percival shouted as he stomped his right foot forward and jumped several meters toward the brother who betrayed him. Anwar met Percival's angry gaze coolly and calmly stepped to the side, evading his brother's attack. Percival was quick to regain his footing and unleashed a flurry of blows towards his hateful enemy. Unfortunately for him, Anwar had more experience in battle, allowing him to smoothly dodge the attacks, which he found very easy to read. The mercenaries watched their leader fight against the younger Tigerkin with amused expressions on their faces. Although they could feel the power emanating from Percival's glowing hands and feet, he was still too green and inexperienced to land a blow on his target. No matter how strong his attacks were, if it didn't hit, it was useless. Anwar didn't plan to block any of Percival's attacks because he knew this as well. So he simply dodged, and he did it well, making Percival angrier because his fists couldn't reach his target. Suddenly, Anwar charged forward, meeting Percival's attack head-on. But at the last second, he dodged to the right, simultaneously throwing his little brother an uppercut that sent the latter flying. "Weak," Anwar scoffed. "It seems that you've been slacking off on your training lately. Did my sworn brother spoil your run?" "I didn't," 13 replied. "I just left him to hunt on his own because I'm busy with other things. You should train him properly. At this rate, he'll just be a cannon fodder once the war starts." Too troublesome. I'll just let Dixon train him." 13. Train a hero? No, thank you. The best way to train a hero was to let him suffer setback after setback, forcing him to grow. That was how heroes grew stronger, and Anwer was currently playing the villain who would force Percival to surpass his current limits. 13 had already given his little hero the divine martial skill, Emperor's Might. If Percival still couldn't overcome his weakness, then it meant that he still hadn't reached the tipping point that would allow him to undergo the true character progression of a hero. "Shut up," Percival roared as he forced himself to stand up. I will kill you. I will kill you." "Keep dreaming," Anwer replied. "A weakling like you will never reach me." Percival then took a fighting stance before his aura exploded like crazy. The golden flames surrounding his arms and feet spread all over his entire body, making him illuminate the darkness of the furthest grasslands with a golden light. "I'll kill you," Percival roared as he disappeared from where he stood. At that moment, the sound of whistling wind reached Anwer's ears. Before he knew it, Percival reappeared several meters away from him before falling headfirst on the ground, sliding until he reached Anwer's feet. He was unable to control the surge of speed and power inside his body, making him trip on one of the holes that was on the ground, which had been created during the earlier battle. Anwer didn't hesitate to use this chance to kick the side of Percival's face, making the latter lose consciousness. Since his drive to fight had disappeared after fainting, the golden aura surrounding him also disappeared, making the mercenaries clap their hands and cheer their leader for winning. 13 glanced at the fallen tigerkin on the ground before walking toward the purple-furred honey badger who was snacking on the diabolical hyena's corpse, eating like there was no tomorrow. The 7-year-old watched as the rank 6 overlord dug the core out of his enemy's body before lifting it to give it a closer look. After admiring it for a few seconds, he decided to eat it and savor its taste. But before he could do that, someone called out to him, making him look at the human boy beside his feet. "Hey, Cranky, we need to talk," 13 said, which made the purple-furred honey badger give him the buzz-off before I kick you gaze. The thing it hated the most was being disturbed during its meal, so he made sure to make its annoyance known to the boy beside its feet. "I know you're busy, so I'll make it quick," 13 said. "First, let me congratulate you. You killed the subordinate of a Magian prince. 2 months from now, that Magian prince will come here, and the first one he'll eat is you." The purple-furred honey badger, who was raring to eat the Jinn core, looked at the boy in disbelief. A second later, its hands trembled, making it drop the core on the ground. 13 watched with great amusement as the purple-furred honey badger hastily picked up the Jinn core, then stuffed it inside the diabolical hyena's body before starting to dig into the ground. Clearly, it wanted to hide all evidence so that it would not be targeted by a monster, which would make the rank 6 diabolical hyena look like a harmless puppy in its eyes. After the battle ended, the gruesome task of dismantling the monster parts, as well as collecting the Jinn cores, started. The Wanderers gained a lot during this battle, with some of them even gaining the avatars of rank 2 and rank 3 golden-eyed hyenas. The rank 5 alpha hyenas, who were considered as the personal guard of their overlord, were crippled by the mercenaries and were turned over to 13. Since his goal was to strengthen his inner circle, he had asked Rihanna, Harry, and Colbert to kill 3 of them. Rihanna, with her exceptional luck, managed to gain a gold-grade Fong sword. Unfortunately, this weapon was still too strong for her to use. The only she could use the weapon was when she stepped into the elite rank, which was the 4th stage in the human rankings. Harry, on the other hand, managed to get a Fong spear, which he also couldn't use at this point in time. However, he was still happy because this was the first gold-grade weapon that he managed to get after going to Solterra. Colbert, who had become 13's left-hand man, might have gotten a bit of luck by rubbing shoulders with Christopher. After getting beaten up in the slave arena for several weeks, he finally found a stroke of luck after becoming the 7-year-old subordinate. He managed to obtain a rank 5 alpha monster avatar, making him extremely happy. So ecstatic to the point of almost hugging 13, but Christopher blocked his path and pushed him away from his young master. The other Wanderers could only look at the 3 of them with envy. It was at that moment that they realized who truly called the shots in their group, which made them sigh in their heart. If they had only tried to get closer to the 7-year-old, wouldn't they also have the opportunity to gain rewards such as these? 13, who understood what the other wanderers were thinking, asked Rihanna to choose 2 people from her group to get the last hit to the 2 remaining rank 5 alpha hyenas. But knowing that the kind-hearted girl wouldn't be able to decide on the spot, he threw her a lifeline. He gave her a stack of wooden sticks and dipped 3 of them in the blood on the ground. 13 then dried them off and returned it to the stack. "You handle the rest, Rihanna," 13 said before going toward Blackie, who was waiting for him. After managing to convince Cranky to help them in the war, he started to feel a strong pull from something in the furthest grasslands. Since everyone was still busy collecting monster parts and Jin cores, 13 asked Anwer to accompany him to the location that was calling out to him. Accompanied by 5 champions and 50 grandmasters, 13's group left the battlefield to collect other spoils of the war. Fortunately, after traveling for 20 minutes, they arrived at a cave, which he believed was the den of the rank 6 overlord. The grandmasters remained outside to guard the entrance, while 13, Anwer, and the 5 champions entered the cave to check what was waiting for them inside. When they arrived at the deepest part of the cave, they all looked in surprise when they saw a pile of beast cores stacked like a small hill. Cores? Why didn't that diabolical hyena eat these cores? Anwer asked. 13 pondered for a bit before digging up the information of the diabolical hyena in his database. After reading all relevant information, he came across something that made him understand why the rank 6 overlord had left the other cores untouched. It had just evolved, so its body is temporarily unable to digest cores properly, 13 explained. It needed to wait 3 more months before it could start eating cores again. So, it had no choice but to store the cores that were given to it as tribute by its subordinates. Anwer chuckled. Then I guess you got lucky. 13 pondered a bit before making a decision. I will share half of this with you, Anwer, 13 stated. Feel free to give them to the mercenaries who helped you on this mission. The 5 champions, who were secretly feeling greedy after discovering the stack of beast cores, looked at the 7-year-old with satisfied looks on their faces. Anwer, who immediately understood why Zion did this, smiled faintly. Good. Anwer nodded. Thank you, Zion. You really are my sworn brother. The Tigerkin made sure to put more strength on the words sworn brother, so that the mercenary leaders will understand his relationship with the boy. This was a subtle reminder that in the future, if they ever needed to cooperate with Zion, they must treat him more favorably. After dividing the stash, they returned to the battlefield and headed toward 13th's secret base near the furthest grasslands. Percival kept on glaring in Anwer's direction, but the older Tigerkin treated him like air. Before they fought against the diabolical hyena, 13 had sent Visago to meet Anwer and asked for reinforcements. He wasn't confident that their force would be enough to defeat their enemy, so he decided to get some kind of insurance just in case things spiraled out of control. Fortunately, Anwer arrived on time and came to their rescue. Now that he was here, the 7-year-old could give him the same divine technique that he bestowed upon Percival. Yes, 13 planned to give Anwer the divine martial technique, Emperor's Might, so that he could continue to polish the rough gem called Percival, allowing him to grow as a true hero. Although the barbarians and the Tigerkins were at odds with each other, none of them made any move to fight then and there. The mercenaries were under Anwer's employ, and since Zion was his sworn brother, they decided to keep things civil on the surface. Also, the 7-year-old's bribe made the mercenary leaders fond of him, so they ordered their men to not cause trouble for the boy. Brother, I am about to give you a martial skill that will unlock your potential, 13 said after he and Anwer had entered his room. But I want you to promise me one thing. You will not tell anyone about this. Understood, Anwer replied. Tell me, the power that Percival showed a while ago, is that the same power you will give me? Yes. 13 nodded. It's called Emperor's Might, a technique perfect for beastkins. Just like Christopher, Anwer had stopped trying to understand why the 7-year-old was capable of doing things that the kids of his age couldn't normally do. His sworn brother had always been a mystery to him, and the more he interacted with Zion, the more he realized that his fate had completely changed for the better the day that he decided to take the 7-year-old's hand and become his sworn brother. Truth be told, He was very surprised at Percival's sudden display of power, and he would be lying if he said that he didn't feel jealous of his stepbrother's talents. However, now that this sworn brother was going to give him the same power, he sensed that a new door was about to open up just for him. He clearly felt this the moment an influx of information flooded his mind, making him fall into a trance. After the skill transfer ended, 13 sighed in relief before lying on the bed to take a nap. While all of this was happening, Percival was sitting at the corner of his room and hugging his legs. Anwar's words kept playing in a loop inside his mind, making him gnash his teeth in anger. But he couldn't refute that he wasn't able to even land a blow on his stepbrother's body despite being more powerful than him. A moment later, the image of a 7-year-old overlapped with Anwar's image inside his head. He had long wanted to fight against the 7-year-old, who had continuously made him suffer and treated him like a slave. "I'll show you." Percival clenched his fists tightly. "I'll show you that I'm not weak." Right now, he wanted to remove the heart demon inside his heart. For that to happen, he must defeat the boy who had now become his master. Although he knew that fighting against Zion was unfair because he was stronger and far older than him, his instincts were screaming at him that unless he managed to defeat his current master, he would be unable to defeat his brother. Percival's logic might have been twisted due to the desperation, anger, and the loss he suffered in Anwar's hand. But one thing was clear: unless he broke free from Zion's control, he would never be free. This was why he decided to challenge the boy to a duel, with his freedom as a reward if he won. Percival believed that the moment he regained his freedom, he would no longer have any shackles in his heart, allowing him to return to the Sumatran kingdom and reunite with his family at last. Anwar sighed softly as he opened his eyes. He didn't know how long he had been sitting cross-legged on the floor, but at this time, it was something he didn't bother to care about. Raising his right hand, he channeled the martial technique that his sworn brother had imparted to him. A moment later, his right hand was covered by a black flame, making him arch an eyebrow. "I see. So this is the upgraded version of Emperor's Might," Anwar thought as he felt the influx of power that was circulating around his body. But before he could truly appreciate his newfound power, a loud shout reached his ears, making him look in the direction of the door. What did that little stepbrother of mine do this time? Anwar mused as he left 13's room to see the commotion that was happening. "Fight me!" Percival's shout spread inside the cavern. "Fight me, and if I win, you will give me back my freedom." Percival pointed a finger at the 7-year-old, who was looking back at him with his arms crossed over his chest. "Fight you?" 13 asked in disdain. "Are you serious?" "Fight me," Percival growled. "Coward!" The Wanderers and the Tigerkins, who were resting after their battle, looked at Percival and thought that he was out of his mind. Even the mercenaries couldn't help but look at him in contempt. For them, the scene playing was like an adult bullying child. Percival was already an adept, and the 7-year-old wasn't even a rookie. "Oi, can you stop making others look down on our race?" One of the Tigerkin mercenary leaders, who had a good impression of 13, commented. "You're making us all look bad." The other Tigerkins nodded their heads at the same time, because they also thought that Percival's behavior was very shameless. But before Percival could even tell the mercenary leader to shut up, a familiar voice reached his ears. "Why don't you accept his challenge, Zion?" Anwar, who had already arrived behind the younger boy, said. "That way, he will understand his place." A sigh escaped 13's lips before he nodded his head. "Fine," 13 replied. "So, if you win, you will regain your freedom. But what if I win? Then I will become your slave." Percival answered. "But you're already my slave." "No, I might be your slave, but I do not recognize you as my master. If you win, I promise that I will no longer defy you. You can order me until this slave mark disappears naturally." Another sigh escaped the younger boy's lips, but he still nodded his head. "Fine." 13 glanced at his father, Gerald, and the latter looked at him with a frown on his face. Clearly, Gerald could see that the Tigerkin was stronger than his son, and he was worried that he might seriously get injured if the two of them were to fight with each other. "We will fight 3 hours from now," 13 stated before walking out of the cavern. "Until then, behave yourself." Having accomplished his goal, Percival sat cross-legged on the corner of the cavern to meditate. He didn't care what others thought about him. The only thing that mattered was that once he regained his freedom, he could finally return to his family. 13, who was walking toward the exit of the cavern, asked Giga Chad to follow him. I know I was the one that asked you to fight my brother, but can you win, Zion? Anwar asked, walking in tandem with 13. The possibility exists, 13 replied, but I need to make some preparations beforehand. What kind of preparations? If there's anything I can help you with, just say the word. Once they arrived outside of the cave, 13 glanced at his surroundings before walking 100 meters to the right. When he was a good distance away, he asked Giga Chad to punch the ground where he was pointing at, creating a hole that was a foot deep. Every spot that 13 pointed, the Chad skunk punched without asking any questions. In fact, Giga Chad thought that he and his master were playing a game, so he happily did what the boy asked him to. Anwar, who was watching from the side, didn't know if his sworn brother was just playing around with his pet or actually preparing for the fight. But an hour later, it dawned to him what kind of preparation Zion was talking about earlier. I see. So he's going to use this place as the arena where he will fight Percival, Anwar thought. But all that those holes would be doing is to hinder both of their movements. Also, tigerkins are very agile and flexible. The one who will have a disadvantage will not be my brother, but Zion. After he came to this realization, Anwar decided to stop the duel if Percival got carried away and seriously injured his sworn brother. Truth be told, he was simply curious how capable 13 was. For the 7-year-old to grant him a martial technique, it proved that he wasn't an ordinary human boy. 2 hours later, everyone inside the cave came out to watch the duel between Percival and the younger boy, who was currently equipped with 2 gauntlets on his hands. Gerald gave Zion the pseudo-silver grade bone gauntlets he crafted. They were made from the skulls of monsters that used their hard heads as a weapon to head, but their predators. It was very lightweight, yet durable at the same time. Also, it packed a punch, allowing 13 to use his martial technique, Righteous Sentinel, to its limits. I will serve as the referee of this match, Gerald declared. Any objections? None, Percival replied as he gazed at his opponent, who was busy drinking something from a flask. Wait, let me finish. Hick. Drinking first, 13 replied as he drank an alcoholic beverage that he had crafted in his spare time. Gerald frowned, but he didn't stop his son from doing what he wanted. He already knew that everything Zion did had a reason, so he believed that this was part of his son's strategy. Percival looked at the 7-year-old in contempt, thinking that Zion was drinking so that he would take it easy on him. However, he had no intention of doing so, especially after everything that the boy had done to him in the past. Still, this arena is so annoying, Percival thought, because there were so many holes in his surroundings. Who can fight properly in this place? Just as he was thinking along these lines, 13 burped and threw his flask away, raising his hands and taking a boxer fighting stance. Rehick dy, 13 said. The tigerkins couldn't help but shake their heads as they looked at this farce. Even Arthas and Netero couldn't help but feel that this duel was a joke. But there was someone who thought otherwise and was even looking forward to what was going to happen to the duel. It was none other than the drow, Adira, who had long wanted to see what Zion was truly capable of. She had already acknowledged his intellect and wisdom. However, she wasn't sure if the boy still had something else to hide. I hope I see something interesting, Adira mused as she waited for the duel to begin. Fortunately, she didn't have to wait a long time because Gerald raised his hand and declared the start of the duel. Duel start, Gerald shouted. As soon as the signal was given, Percival lunged at Zion with a sneer on his face. There was no way he would lose against a 7-year-old human, even if one of his hands were tied behind his back. But at the same time that the tigerkin lunged at him, 13 jumped back. Percival was quick to adjust his attack, using his hands to tap the ground once and propelling himself upward in order to land behind the 7-year-old, whose movements were getting wobbly. However, when he realized that the place where he was going to land had a hole in it, he immediately tried to adjust his landing to a different place. Unfortunately, the boy made an unexpected move, arching his back like a gymnast doing the bridge, but instead of his hands touching the ground, His two gauntlet fists smacked Percival's stomach, making the latter grunt in pain. The tigerkin lost his balance after he landed, making him take a few steps backward. Unfortunately, his right foot stepped onto a hole, making him lose his balance a second time. At that exact moment, 13's foot hit his left leg, making Percival fall on the ground. Fearing that the 7-year-old would take that opportunity to attack him, the tigerkin raised his guard to deflect any blow that would land on his body. But instead of the blow, a chuckle filled with mischief reached his ears, making the proud tigerkin's cheeks redden in shame and embarrassment. Percival, as well as those who were watching the duel, thought that this battle was going to be one-sided. However, that brief exchange was enough to tell them that the winner of the duel might not be Percival, who was 2 ranks stronger than his opponent. Rihanna, Harry, and the other wanderers looked at 13 with solemn looks on their faces. They knew that he was from the Levinas family, so they never judged him based on the normal standards of Solterra. From the beginning, they were observing him as one of the scions of the 10 prestigious families. For them, Zion knowing how to fight was not a surprise. However, they still thought that due to his age, he would have a hard time fighting against a tigerkin who specialized in close combat. But as the minutes passed by, they were starting to understand that they had still greatly underestimated the little boy, who was a few years younger than them. You really cannot judge a book by its cover, especially if they belong to one of the prestigious families, Rufus muttered, making Jean and Aaron nod their heads in agreement. Some of them started to wonder, if they were in Zion's shoes, would they be able to fight Percival in close combat? The answer was obvious. They couldn't. All of them couldn't understand how the 7-year-old was doing it. It was as if Zion already knew how Percival would attack him and where he was going to attack him. They watched as sparks flew the moment Percival's claws were deflected by 13's gauntlet. However, after that exchange, the tigerkin once again found his foot inside a hole, making him unable to dodge the younger boy's counterattack, which rattled his jaw. 13 didn't miss a beat and unleashed a quick jab, targeting Percival's jaw for the second time, before wobbling backwards like a drunk man. The mercenary leaders, who were watching from the side, couldn't help but be impressed by the 7-year-old's fighting style, which was similar to Brawler's. But the thing that impressed them the most was his drunken movements, making his attacks unpredictable. Also, even in his drunken state, he never stepped in a hole even once. The only one who always lost his footing was Percival. It was as if Zion was goading him to make a mistake and using that opportunity to land a blow or two on the tigerkin's body. Blood seeped from the corner of Percival's lips as he clenched his teeth in anger. Damn you! Percival no longer held back and activated his Emperor's might. He no longer felt guilty or embarrassed about using his trump card because he couldn't afford to lose, especially not in front of his brother, whom he hated more than the boy in front of him. Percival then disappeared from where he stood and punched Zion's chest with the intention of sending the boy flying. But as if expecting his attack, 13 crossed his arms over his chest and jumped backward. Due to the hole in front of him, Percival was forced to make immediate adjustments. So when his blow hit the 7-year-old's gauntlets, the only thing he managed to do was push him away. Most of the strength behind his strike had decreased exponentially, allowing the boy to avoid any serious injury. Knowing that he mustn't let this setback get to him, Percival zigzagged across the battlefield, dodging the holes as he made his way toward the boy, who had a mischievous smile plastered on his face. "I'll wipe that smile off your face, even if it's the last thing I do," Percival thought as he punched forward. But, as if he had already predicted this move, 13 turned his body to the side, grabbed hold of Percival's arm, and used his momentum to slam him to the ground. The tigerkin coughed out a mouthful of blood as his world turned upside down. One moment, he was charging toward his enemy. The next moment, he was lying on the ground and staring at a gauntlet that was about to smack his face. 13's blow connected, which was aimed on the tigerkin's nose, breaking it. But Percival didn't care. He didn't block the strike. Instead, he grabbed hold of the gauntlet to make sure that his enemy wasn't going anywhere. However, 13 had already predicted that this would happen. So, The moment his attack connected, he immediately took the gauntlet off his right hand using a special mechanism and jumped back. Percival, who had missed the opportunity to grab hold of his target, threw the gauntlet away in anger. "What are you going to do now?" Percival snarled. "You lost one of your weapons." "I don't mind, hick." 13 chuckled. "I lost my gauntlet, but you, hick, lost your nose. A fair trade, right? Hick, damn you." Percival was about to go mad due to anger because no matter what he did, his attacks failed to reach the hateful human who was looking at him with an amused expression on his face. "Die." Percival thrust his hands forward and unleashed a golden flame. The fire spread toward 13, which almost made Gerald jump in front of him to save his son. But something caught his eye, making him, Adira, and Anwar stop their attempt to go and save him. The golden flames spread, decimating everything in its path, leaving only scorched earth behind. "Why, yes, I did it." Percival laughed crazily. I won. But amidst his laughter, an eerie voice reached his ears, making his body stiffen. "Says who?" Percival angrily turned around and raised his fist. But before he even saw the 7-year-old, he saw a tail made up of rocks headed in his direction. It was already too late for Percival to do anything. The only thing he could do was groan in pain as Rocky's tail slammed on his chest, sending him flying. The tigerkin rolled several meters on the ground before coming to a complete stop. With blood dripping from the corner of his lips, he forced himself to raise his head to look in the direction of the Rocky Balboa and the boy, who was sitting inside its mouth. "Why, you cheated," Percival said through bloody teeth. "I did," 13 replied, no longer looking like a drunk child. "So it's your win. Happy? How can I be happy like this?" Percival could feel his tears falling down his face as lowered his head to the ground. "How can I be happy with this kind of victory?" "Well, a win is a win, so that's that," 13 commented before snapping his fingers. "Congratulations. You are now free." Percival immediately felt as if a weight had been lifted off his body, but he didn't feel the happiness that he thought would feel after regaining his freedom. Instead, what he felt was shame and embarrassment. 13 jumped out of Rocky's mouth and thanked him for saving him. He knew that the moment Percival used his Emperor's might, the battle would become a bit more difficult. This was why he ordered Rocky to come to his rescue the moment his life would truly be in danger. However, he hadn't asked the Rocky Balboa to slap Percival with his tail. No, Rocky did that of his own volition, which made Tiona nod her head in satisfaction. After spending some time with the human boy, Rocky had learned to appreciate him, just like Giga Chad did. Because of this, as long as he could help it, he would not allow any harm to come to 13. Not to mention that the latter entrusted him to save his life if ever he was truly in danger. "Brother, make sure that Tiger returns safely to his family," 13 said as he walked toward the entrance of the cavern. "Understood," Anwar nodded. "We will be leaving in an hour. If something else comes up, you know where to find me." "I know," 13 smiled. "Thank you, brother." The 7-year-old exchanged a fist bump with Anwar before going back to the cave in order to rest. He didn't even glance in Percival's direction. In his point of view, he had already taught his little hero all the lessons that he needed to teach him. The problem with Percival was that he hadn't truly experienced what it felt like to lose in his life. Although he fought in the slave arena, all the monsters he fought were stronger than or equal in strength with him. He never even considered that he would be defeated by someone weaker than him. Although he had won, it didn't feel that way to him. Instead, he felt that he was the biggest loser in the duel. This made him unable to look at the 7-year-old, whose small figure made everyone who watched the duel look at him in a better light. 2 days after 13th's and Percival's duel. "We're finally here, young master," Dixon said with a smile. "Welcome back to Karabayur City." Percival stared at the city gates with moist eyes. He never thought that he would see it again so soon. After he won his battle against Zion, the boy had set him free and even ordered Dixon to take him back to the general's residence to reunite with his family. Anwar had lent them his own saber-toothed tiger so that they could get to the city faster. He had no intention of meeting his family at this time, so he returned to Parnia City and dealt with the request that his sworn brother had asked of him. The moment they arrived at the general's residence, news of Percival's return spread like wildfire. A few minutes later, Briella came running toward her son and wrapped him in a tight hug while crying in happiness. General Stark and Cleo also came and joined the family hug, making all the onlookers around them look at them with warm smiles. "You've become thinner," Briella said as she looked at her son, whom she hadn't seen for several weeks. "Come, I'll cook all your favorite foods. Make sure to eat them all, okay?" "Yes, Mother," Percival replied, feeling too emotional to say anything else. As the tigerkin was dragged by his mother and sister inside the house, General Stark asked Dixon to come with him to his office. The general had many questions to ask, and he personally wanted to hear the answers from his right-hand man. After learning what kind of life his son had lived under Zion's wing, the general couldn't help but curse the 7-year-old who had made Percival suffer. However, when he heard how Percival regained his freedom, he couldn't help but frown after hearing the result of the duel. "Percival lost in close combat?" General Stark asked in disbelief. "Against that boy?" "Yes, General," Dixon replied. "Even I was surprised. Zion was actually a good fighter despite his age. But my son is 2 ranks stronger than him," General Stark frowned. "And he still lost?" Dixon nodded. "He still lost despite his advantages. Zion is like a slippery eel, always out of his reach. Although I don't want to admit it, I feel like he already predicted how Percival would move, allowing him to move 2 steps ahead. Although Percival has the advantage in both speed and strength, Zion was reading him like an open book. If I didn't personally witness it, I wouldn't believe it either, General." General Stark sighed before nodding his head. Since Dixon was there when it happened, he had no choice but to believe it. "Then what is that boy doing right now?" General Stark asked. "Has he dealt with the barbarians?" "No," Dixon answered, "but he managed to make the city lord of Groner City his ally. Over the past month, the only thing he did was help his father build a giant ballista that is 15 meters long. I don't know what he plans to do with it, but he mentioned that it would be the key to ending the war, so he asked us to help him build it." General Stark pondered for a while before voicing out his thoughts. "If he is making a ballista that big, he will probably use it against the Magian Prince," General Stark stated. "The only question now is what kind of ammunition he would use that can defeat a being of that rank. I doubt ordinary steel will pierce Durundel's body. Have you asked him what kind of metal he will be using? Is he going to use adamantine?" "About that, General, he wouldn't say anything," Dixon replied. "No matter who asked him, he just kept his lips shut tight. Even inside our base, I don't see anyone making any kind of ammunition for the ballista. The war is only a month away, so there's still time to make some final adjustments. Also, he asked me to return after a week, so I'll be staying here until then, General. Before I forget, Zion had asked me to pass a letter to you, General." Dixon took out a scroll from his storage ring and handed it to General Stark, who didn't hesitate to read it then and there. As he read the contents of the letter, General Stark couldn't help but frown as a reaction to the content of the letter. The 7-year-old was asking him to prepare 20 saber-toothed tigers for Dixon to bring back with him when he returned to his base. That was still fine. They bred saber-toothed tigers to become the mounts of the tigerkins, so they had plenty to spare. However, Zion told him one more thing, and that was the thing that was making the general frown. "Is something the matter, General?" Dixon, who noticed the general's distasteful expression, asked with concern. Although he didn't like how Zion did things, especially when he ordered Giga Chad to fart on him, he still appreciated the boy's leadership and charisma, which children his age didn't usually possess. "It's nothing," General Stark replied. "The boy is just asking me for 20 saber-toothed tigers. You will be bringing them back when you return to him in a week. With that said, go to the stable in the barracks and pick out 20 rank 2 tigers that have been properly trained. That will be enough for his use." The general had no plans to give Zion rank 3 or higher saber-toothed tigers because they were hard to raise, and the resources used on them weren't cheap. But he still agreed to let the 7-year-old have rank 2 monsters, which wasn't too shabby either. "I'll go and have lunch with my family," General Stark stated. "It has been a while since we all had a meal together." Dixon nodded in understanding and didn't mention the fact that they still had one family member missing, and that was Anwar. However, after what happened recently, he made sure to keep his lips shut tight because the general's feelings for his adopted son were a bit complicated. Still, he knew that Percival's return to the residence was a positive thing. The smiles of the general's family that were lost when Percival disappeared had finally returned, and that was something worthy of celebration. Meanwhile, on the third island of the Valbera archipelago, Blackie, who had swam all the way to the island, shook his body, sending water droplets flying in every direction. 13, who had already dismounted from the Warzer Black Hound, walked toward the people who were seated around a bonfire beside a cave. "You're here, Zion," a barbarian shaman greeted him with a smile. "Have you finished the thing that you were working on?" "Yes, Auntie Helen," 13 replied. "Where's Uncle Roger?" "He's inside the cave and is monitoring the smelting process. Why don't you join us for lunch? You and Blackie have journeyed quite far to reach us. Did you bring Rocky with you?" As if waiting for that moment, the Rocky Balboa emerged from the ground and let out a low growl. This was his way of greeting the barbarian and tigerkin shamans who were staying on the third island, which was sacred to everyone in the Valbera archipelago. "Lunch sounds good," 13 said as he looked at the fish that were being grilled beside the bonfire. "I'll humbly accept your invitation, Auntie Helen." Everyone in their secret base was wondering what kind of ammunition 13 would be using for the Grand Ballista. However, no matter who asked him, 13 refused to say anything. He knew that if he gave them an answer, all of them would definitely call him a heretic, for what he was doing was blasphemy. This was also why the ultimate weapon that would deal a devastating blow to the Magian Prince was being created on the third island of the Valbera archipelago, a place where the barbarians and the tigerkins would not dare to investigate. Only the shamans were allowed to wander freely around the island. Visitors who come were only allowed to wander on the beach area. 13 knew that if the other races were to discover what he was doing, they would rise up to hunt him down. However, they didn't know that the shamans, who were guarding the sacred island, were working with Zion to create the ultimate weapon that could theoretically deal with the Magian Prince, who would be arriving a month from now. "Hello, Uncle Roger," 13 greeted the tigerkin shaman, who was busy smelting the materials they would use to create the ammunition for his Grand Ballista. "Zion, you came at the right time," Roger replied. "It's halfway complete. Did you come here to check if things are going as scheduled?" 13 nodded yes. "Things are a bit hectic in the Warzer Plains, so I came here to take a breather." "A breather? Sounds nice," Roger commented. "Still, to think that you're making our old bones do the work for you. You really know how to order people around, don't you?" 13 smiled faintly because he also felt a bit guilty for asking the shamans for help. However, there wasn't really anything he could do about it. The material they were using was something that only shamans were allowed to work with, for it was something sacred to the people of the Valbera archipelago. "Uncle, I'll be staying here until this thing is completed," 13 stated. "So, please put your back into it. You little rascal. Come here so I can cane you," Roger said as he lifted his walking stick and waved it in 13's direction. The 7-year-old chuckled and ensured that he remained well outside of the old tigerkin shaman striking range. Just like the tigerkin had stated, the thing that they were working on was halfway done. So at most, it would only take them a few more days to complete the ammunition for the Grand Ballista. This bolt, which they had named Endbringer, was only halfway finished. Its final length would be 6 meters long, and its weight would be around 30 tons. 13 would apply rune magic on it once it was completed, strengthening its body further and making it extremely hard. Before he left their hidden base, he had asked his father to create another bolt, which would have the same length as the Endbringer. He had already given Gerald the design of the bolt, and with Netero working with him, they should be able to make a cast for it without problems. This was to make everyone think that the bolt they were working on was the same bolt that they would use during the war. However, this was only half true. The other bolt was only meant to give everyone some peace of mind. Some of them seemed to be getting worried that they had made a weapon, yet they still hadn't made its ammunition. Another reason why 13 left was because the other tigerkins were looking at him with pitiful gazes. All of them were hoping that he would free them as well, but 13 wouldn't have any of it. He threatened to cover them from head to toe with Giga Chad spray, forcing all of them to back down and no longer pester him. It was not that he didn't want to free them. He didn't mind doing that. However, he really needed the manpower to help finish the tasks that he needed to finish before the war started. Setting them free now would be putting the cart before the horse, since the Magian Prince would just massacre everyone once he arrived and enslave the rest. The freedom they sought for would be short-lived. The number of people who knew about the real danger of the upcoming war did not surpass the count of fingers and toes on 13's hands and feet. He planned to keep it that way because the less people knew about it, the better their counterattack would be. 2 days later, 13 placed the last runic symbol on Endbringer, making him and the shamans breathe a sigh of relief. "Thank you very much, everyone," 13 said. "Rest assured, I will make sure that Valbera Archipelago will not fall under the control of Arundel. However, I would greatly appreciate it if you came to me before the war starts. I still need your help to ensure that this mission will succeed." "Of course," Auntie Helen replied. "Although we are old, we are still capable of using a few skills here and there. Just send Rocky to pick us up when you think that Arundel is near our borders. Zion, I pray that the spirits will continue to protect and guide you," Uncle Roger said. "We will use our strength to aid you." 13 nodded. "Thank you, Auntie Helen, Uncle Roger, everyone. I'll see you in a few weeks." Rocky emerged from the ground and swallowed Endbringer whole. It would stay inside his body until the time it would be used to fight against the Magian Prince. That way, it would remain hidden from the sight of everyone who were doing their best to prepare for the upcoming war. 13 mounted Black's back, after which the Warzer Black Hound began to swim in the sea, headed to the biggest island of the Valbera Archipelago. As they were traveling back to their base, 13 wondered if Christopher had already reached the place he asked him to go. This war against the Magian Prince could not be won by the barbarians, orcs, and tigerkins alone. They needed allies, and they needed a lot of them. Christopher might not have a lot of redeeming qualities, but 13 sincerely believed that he was the perfect man for the job. He had asked Jasmine, Ariel, Peyton, and half of Peyton's subordinates to accompany the chubby boy in his mission. This was the only way he could think of to keep him safe and protected, allowing him to focus on his mission without worry. "Man proposes, God disposes," 13 muttered with a wry smile on his face. "Unfortunately, the God of this world is merciless. No one can help us but ourselves." 13 still had a lot of things to do when he returned to the Warzer Plains, and truth be told, it was too much for him to handle it all. But there was no one else who could use rune magic aside from him, so he had no choice but to grit his teeth and create the ultimate battlefield. A chessboard which would grant him the chance of victory against one of the strongest beings in existence, who stood high above mere mortals like them. 3 days after 13 left the third island in the Valbera Archipelago, Percival panted for breath as he slowly propped himself up from the ground. His hands and feet were covered with golden flames, making the onlookers look at him with amazed looks on their faces. Standing in front of him was none other than his father, General Stark, who was having a spar with him. Similar to Percival, General Stark's hands and feet were also covered in golden flames, but they paled in comparison to the golden flames that were blazing in Percival's hands and feet. It was like comparing a bonfire to a forest fire, and just a glance was enough to tell everyone whose martial technique was stronger between the father and son. The general wanted to see if what Dixon said was the truth, and seeing the evidence in front of his eyes removed all doubt he had earlier. However, instead of happiness, the general felt disappointed. Despite being blessed with a superior ability and talent than him when he was Percival's age, his son was still defeated by Zion in a one-on-one duel. Although Percival technically won that duel, in his eyes, the one who lost the battle was the tigerkin standing in front of him. "Can you still fight?" General Stark asked. "Yes, father," Percival replied. "I can still fight." General Stark nodded and took a fighting stance. Although he didn't know how Zion was able to win against him, he had no intention of letting Percival have it easy. The war was approaching, and, according to Cleo's most recent vision, Percival was fighting on the front lines of the battlefield. Since that was the case, the only thing he could do was help train his son to the best of his ability, giving him a higher chance of survival before the war started. An hour later, Percival was lying on the ground, not even able to lift his finger. "That is all for today," General Stark said before turning around. "We will continue our training tomorrow." "Thank you, Father," Percival replied. General Stark nodded and walked away. The onlookers also dispersed after seeing that the battle was over, leaving Percival behind. "I still have a long way to go," Percival muttered as he remained lying on the ground. "Father is really strong." He already knew that it was impossible for him to win against his father in their sparring match because of the difference in ranks. However, every time he thought of this excuse, the image of the 7-year-old who bested him in close combat would appear in his mind, making him grit his teeth in frustration. "I bet you're thinking that losing against your father is perfectly normal, right?" Percival almost jumped up in fright because he heard Zion's hateful voice right next to his ear. However, when he realized that the voice was coming from the dumb-looking bird Visego, the tigerkin roared and tried to smack it away. However, the Poco was a step ahead of him and walked a few steps backwards, away from his reach. "This kind of thinking is the reason I defeated you in our duel," Visego, who was using Zion's voice, said in a teasing tone. "You know, if your father and I fought, the one who would lose would not be me, but your father." "Shut up," Percival shouted. "You're just spouting nonsense." "Am I?" Visego asked, tilting his head to the side. "Trust me, the one I intend to fight is even stronger than your father by several ranks. This is the difference in our abilities. You have skill issues, my guy." 13 had asked Visego to pester Percival and make sure to talk down to the Tigerkin, who had been reunited with his family. What the Tigerkin needed right now was a worthy rival, and 13 had decided to take that role for the time being since Anwar was quite busy handling the affairs of the Sumatran kingdom. The 7-year-old wanted Percival to bounce back in his defeat, but that would not be enough to motivate the Tigerkin to do his best. In order for that to happen, he needed a goal. He needed someone to defeat, and what better target than someone who had defeated him in a duel, despite being way stronger than his opponent. This was the mentality that 13 wanted to instill in Percival. Despite the overwhelming odds of facing a stronger opponent, he must believe that there was a chance of winning. That way, the power of fate would activate and allow him to create miracles, which was the power of *T that belonged to heroes. 13 hated this power the most because regardless of how disadvantaged they were, they always had a way to reverse their current situation and win in the end. Percival was still at the beginning stages of becoming a hero, so he was still unable to utilize this power. What the 7-year-old wanted to do was to help him awaken this power early, because what he needed right now was the power of *T. "You know, you won't get strong by training here with your father," Visego said, using General Stark's voice as his way of further teasing the Tigerkin. "Actually, that power you possess was something that Zion gave to you, you know? And you know what's even more funny? Before you guys went back to the Sumatran kingdom, he gave your brother Anwar the same power. Guess what? Your brother will become much stronger than he is now." Visego chuckled in a disdainful tone, just like the fourth-rate villain that he had become. 13's villainous mannerisms had rubbed off on the Poco, but Visego didn't mind. He actually liked using 13's voice to talk to his subordinates, because he liked how varied their reactions were. "I'll say this again, Taiga, you will not unlock your potential if you train here with your family," Visego stated using 13's voice. "Only I'm able to give you the power you want. Only by being with me will you stop making excuses. Also, if you decide to return, I will tell you the truth about this war and the real enemy that you will be facing in the future. I have already left my message with Dixon, so if you have made up your mind, just talk to him. Lastly, I think it will be best if you have a good talk with your sister, Cleo. Just like your mother, she can also have visions. Why don't you ask her what kind of visions she had been seeing as of late? Maybe that will help you make your decision." After saying those words, Visego flew away and headed towards Parnia City in order to pass Zion's message to Anwar. 13 had allowed Percival to return to his family for a few days because this was what Briella had asked of him. Since the beautiful tigerkin had treated him properly while he was still living in their residence, the 7-year-old thought that it wouldn't be a big deal to let Percival go home for a few days. Somewhere on the main continent, Arundel looked at his army, which was in the process of boarding the ships that would take them to the Valbera archipelago. These ships were being pulled by sea monsters, allowing them to travel faster compared to those who relied on sails to travel the sea. He had lost all contact with Gale from the barbarians, making him wonder if the one he'd chosen had decided to betray him. Fortunately, Paven was still there to communicate with him, allowing him to better understand the situation in the Valbera archipelago. Since it had already come to this, he decided to oversee the war himself, and if it didn't progress the way he intended, he would not hesitate to interfere and forcefully make everyone submit to his rule. Although it was embarrassing, he didn't want to lose his bet with Commissats, who always talked to him as if he was beneath him. However, now that things had gotten out of hand, he decided to act personally even though he would become the laughingstock of their organization. He would rather endure this kind of shame and embarrassment than lose completely. I guess my plan to impress the other Magian princes and princesses has backfired, Arundel thought as he gazed at his army. But it doesn't matter. This is just a small setback. I will be able to regain my prestige in the future. With this thought in mind, the Magian prince, who was hailed as the Destroyer, boarded the flagship of his army, which was being pulled personally by a kraken. It would still take a day before they departed from their territory, yet the news of Arundel making his move had already started to spread among the powerful factions who bordered his territory. It had been 2 days since Visago had talked to Percival, and yet he couldn't shake off the words that the Poco Poco had spoken to him. He was feeling restless, as if he was out of the loop and everyone around him knew what was happening, while he was left in the dark. Percival thought that the power he now possessed was something he already had by birth. But after being told that the one who gave him the power he had was none other than the master that had tortured him, he felt devastated. Because of this, he did the only thing he could do and talk to his mother. He wanted to know if what Zion said about Cleo having visions was the truth or not. You want to ask Cleo about her visions? Briella looked at his son with worry. Why? Because I want to know the truth, Percival replied. The real reason behind this war, and why Anwer is allowed to roam free despite what he did to me. Briella sighed because her once happy family had broken apart due to Anwer's actions. However, Zion had also chastised her because she could have stopped it if she wanted to. But she did not. The 7-year-old told her straight up that the reason why Percival was taken away was because she allowed it to happen. She was at fault, just like Anwer was, so she didn't have the moral standing to blame him for enslaving Percival. In the end, all of this happened because she decided to turn a blind eye to everything. Understood, Briella said softly. Let's go see Cleo. freewebnovel.com. Percival nodded and followed his mother until they arrived at his sister's room. Cleo, it's me. Briella knocked on the door. Percival wants to talk to you. The door opened, showing a pretty tigerkin who was only a few years older than Percival. Come in, mother, brother, Cleo said as she opened the door wider. I've been expecting the two of you. Briella found her daughter's choice of words quite interesting because she never used it before. However, since her daughter was a seer, she thought that her powers might have evolved, allowing her to see more things clearly. The 3 tigerkins sat on the couch, as Percival told his older sister the reason he wanted to talk to her. When I first saw Zion, I saw him standing on a hill, as giant fireballs descended from the sky. The barbarians, the tigerkins, were caught up in the explosions, with some of them dying and getting burned alive on the spot. Cleo's words were measured, yet firm and clear. If in the past, she would shudder while recalling these things. But now, things were different. She had become a little bit stronger and accepted that her visions served as a warning and hope for her and her people. But I've been seeing more visions of him as of late. Cleo's hand that was being held by her mother trembled a bit as she recalled her latest vision about Zion. I saw him facing off against a horned monster with flames covering its body. You and Brother Anwer were there as well, supporting him from the side. This monster is the reason this war is happening in the first place, and his name is Arundel the Destroyer, a Magian prince who is coming to conquer our lands and enslave our people. Briella and Percival didn't say anything when Cleo said Brother Anwer. Instead, they focused on her latest vision, which showed Zion fighting on the front lines against a being that was stronger than the Barbarian King and the Tigerkin King. But what was more surprising was that the ones helping him fight it were none other than Percival and Anwer. Such a being was beyond their capabilities to fight, and yet there they were, fighting against it with grim expressions on their faces. "Did you see the outcome of the battle?" Percival asked. "Did we win?" "I don't know," Cleo answered. "I didn't see anything that might tell me the outcome of the battle. I just know that you and Brother Anwer were fighting the Magian Prince with Zion." "You said that he was fighting the Magian Prince too, right?" Percival asked. "How's he fighting? Did you see him punch the Magian Prince?" His question was filled with sarcasm. Although he didn't doubt his sister's vision, he found the mere thought of Zion fighting on the front lines very ridiculous. Cleo didn't think much of the sarcasm in Percival's question and only looked at him sadly. "Brother, don't talk about Zion like that," Cleo said softly. She wanted to say more things, but she couldn't do it because saying it was very painful. Cleo had seen how hurt Zion was in her vision, and it made her feel hurt as well. She had seen the 7-year-old's face filled with anger as tears fell from his eyes. His body, which was soaked in his blood and the blood of others, continued to stand tall as he faced the Magian Prince with determination. Seeing him like that, she felt ashamed and embarrassed of herself because she had feared him back then. She thought that he was a monster hiding inside a human's body. But she found out through her vision that he was more kind and compassionate than others. The tears she saw back then, the anger in his roars, the desperation in his eyes, made her wish that if there was an ending in her vision, she hoped that it was a happy one. For that was the only thing that would justify all the pain and sadness that the entirety of the Valbera archipelago would experience on that fateful day. A day when their pride and dignities would be trampled on by an existence that only knew how to destroy the happiness that they held dear in their lives. Seeing the look on her sister's face, Percival couldn't help but avert his gaze. Her gaze was piercing, as if she could see right through his insecurities, making him feel ashamed. A moment later, Percival could no longer bear it and left the room to head to his father's office. He needed to do one more thing before he could make up his mind whether to return to Zion or not. But before that, he needed to meet with his brother, Anwer, once again. Only by doing so could he make a decision that would make him realize that his greatest enemy was actually his strongest ally. "Master Anwer, a guest has arrived," one of the servants in Paven's residence reported. "A guest?" The corner of the Tigerkin's lips curled up into a smirk. "And just who is this guest?" He introduced himself as Percival Evander, the servant answered. "He is accompanied by someone named Dixon." "I see." Anwer resumed writing the letter that he was working on, but not before he ordered the servant to bring his guest to his office. Several minutes later, there was a knock on the door, and the servant announced the arrival of their guests. "Come in," Anwer stated as he finished the final part of the letter that he was working on. Anwer then blew on the letter that he had just finished writing to help dry the ink on it. A few seconds later, he raised his head to look at the two people that had entered his room and gave them a smile. "Hello, Taiga," Anwer said. "What are you doing here?" "That's not my name," Percival replied. Anwer only shrugged before resting the side of his face on the palm of his right hand. "So, what are you doing here?" Anwer asked. "Is it true that you now have the same power as me?" Percival asked back. "Are you referring to the Emperor's might?" Anwer arched an eyebrow. "If that's what you're referring to, then I have it as well." As if to prove that his words were true, Anwer raised his left hand, enveloping it in dark flames that blazed fiercely. "Zion is really something," Anwer smirked. "Having him as a sworn brother is the best thing that happened to me." Percival, whose gaze was locked on the flames that were burning around Anwer's left hand, felt an ache in his heart. Although the color of the flames were different, there was no doubt in his mind that Anwer was using the same technique as him. Half a minute later, he took a deep breath and met his stepbrother's gaze. "Fight me," Percival declared. Fight you. Anwar snorted. And why should I do that? Are you going to act like a spoiled brat like you did with Zion and demand that you fight him over and over again? Oi, Taiga, I'm not as free as you, okay? Anwar then folded the letter he had written and placed it inside an envelope. A moment later, he let the candle wax drip over it before using the ring in his hand to stamp it. Anwar's seal, which was now recognized by the leaders of the underworld, was only given to those who had the ability to accomplish the tasks that were written inside the envelope. This is the last time I will ask you to fight with me, Percival stated. After this, I will not ask you to fight me again. Oh, Anwar sneered. Who are you to demand such a thing? Also, must I remind you that you've gotten your ass handed to you by a 7-year-old who is several times weaker than you? If you can't even beat Zion, do you really think you have the chance to beat me? I didn't come here to beat you. Percival took a step forward. I came here to settle things between us. Now you're talking. Anwar nodded. I can accept your challenge, if this is your reason for coming here. But before that, Amory, can you deliver this letter? The cabinet inside the room opened, and the assassin, who was now Anwar's right-hand man, appeared in front of everyone. Should I deliver it to him? Amory inquired. Yes, Anwar answered. Understood. Amory nodded. The assassin then walked out of the room without even glancing at their guests, who had come to challenge his boss. Well then, let's go, Anwar ordered as he stood up from his chair. I don't have a lot of free time to babysit you, Taiga, so let's end this quickly. Knowing that Anwar would keep calling him Taiga, Percival no longer corrected him and just followed behind him. A few minutes later, they arrived at the back of Pavin's residence, which served as the training area for the guards. Anwar and Percival faced each other and took a fighting stance. One question before we start, Anwar said. What do you plan to do after our duel ends? I'm going back to the barbarian lands, Percival replied. Oh, does that mean that you plan to leave your family behind? I've already told them of my decision. Father and mother didn't dissuade me because of Cleo's vision. A frown appeared on Anwar's face because his stepsister, Cleo, was one of his reverse scales. And what did she see? Anwar asked with genuine curiosity. I'm not telling you. Percival stuck out his tongue. If you want to know, go and ask for yourself. Cheeky brat. I guess it's time to pound some real sense to you. Do your worst, use sorry excuse for a brother. After that exchange of barbed words, the two unleashed their emperor's might, raising their fighting prowess to their limits. A few seconds later, both of them vanished from where they stood and clashed at the center of the arena, sending dirt flying in every direction as a shock wave expanded outwards. High above a tree branch, Visego groomed his wing, while giving side glances to the two tigerkins, who were duking it out with each other. He had already expected this outcome, especially after saying those words to Percival a few days ago. Zion really knows how to ruffle the feathers of others, Visego thought. But it seems that his prediction about Tiger returning is coming true. The Poco Poco had grown fond of his mysterious master, whose intellect surpassed children his age. I just hope that Poca, who is following Christopher, will return with good news, Visego sighed in his heart. Although he was worried about the chubby boy, who was loyal to a fault, he trusted that Zion wouldn't send him to a place that was too dangerous for him. Right now, all of them had important roles to play, which would become evident a few weeks from now. The Tigerkins and the Barbarians had almost finished their war preparations. It was only a matter of time before their armies marched and faced each other on the Warzur Plains, where 13's forces would congregate in the not-so-distant future. After traveling for nearly a week, Percival stared at the entrance of the cave where the 7-year-old boy's secret base was located. But just as he was about to enter, he saw something big walk out of the cave, making him flinch. You could not live with your own failure. What did that bring you? Back to me, 13 said with a smug look on his face. Welcome back, Taiga. Have you prepared yourself to venture to hell and back? Percival didn't reply right away. Instead, he eyed the younger boy, who was sitting on the back of the Chad skunk, Giga Chad. No matter how much he tried to gauge Zion's strength, the only thing he could see was a powerless human boy, whose neck he could easily snap if he wished for it. But this same powerless boy was the person who made him understand that strength wasn't the only way to win battles. A minute later, Percival dismounted from the saber-toothed tiger and walked towards Zion with a determined expression on his face. When he was only 3 meters away from the Chad skunk, he knelt on the ground and looked at the younger boy with a steady gaze. "Can you make me strong?" Percival asked. "I can," 13 replied with confidence. "Then, will you accept me as your disciple?" A disciple? Freewebnovel.cm. 13 arched an eyebrow as he looked at the kneeling tigerkin in front of him. "You mean to say you want to learn things from me for free without giving anything in return?" 13 smirked. "I'm not a very charitable person, so I'll have to decline your request." "Then what do you want?" Percival asked. "Do you want to enslave me again?" "No." 13 shook his head. "What I want from you is a promise. If you survive this war, you will become my subordinate for 2 years. "Only 2 years?" Percival asked back. "Only 2 years." 13 chuckled. "Fine. Since you sound so disappointed, let's make it 3 years. "Wait, I didn't say that you could increase it. You have a problem, Brah." A sigh escaped Percival's lips because he knew the kind of look that Zion was giving him. It was the kind of look where he wouldn't take no for an answer, making him have no choice but to nod his head in agreement. 3 years then, Percival stated, "I will serve you faithfully as your subordinate for 3 years. 13 nodded. "Good. Since I'm investing in you, you better not die." "I don't plan to die," Percival replied firmly. "Come inside," 13 ordered. "We don't have much time left, so I'll make you strong before this day is over." Percival became confused after hearing Zion's words. He was expecting that the boy would use the remaining days to train him, but from the way he worded his statement, the 7-year-old only intended to train him for a day, which made him wonder if he was joking or not. Dixon watched the exchange with amusement because he thought that 13 was just teasing the general's son. There was no way that he could train Percival to become strong in a day. But this was why he was wrong as well. 13 wasn't an ordinary boy, and since he lacked time, he intended to use a special method to train Taiga. As the tigerkin entered the interior of the cave, he was pleasantly surprised to see that there were already 2 steel-reinforced bolts that the Grand Ballista could use as ammunition. Zion had hailed the Grand Ballista as their trump card during the war, and he had to admit that it looked imposing enough to be called one. It didn't take long before 13 and Percival arrived in his room. Just like always, he had asked Christopher and Giga Chad to guard the door so that no one would disturb them. "Last time, I knocked you out," 13 stated. "But this time, I will not do such a thing. So, sit cross-legged and close your eyes." Percival did as he was told and closed his eyes obediently. The only way for him to train Percival was to allow him to inherit the battle experience of a fighter that specialized in using Emperor's might. Fortunately, he had that kind of experience because one of his hosts was a candidate to become the next Beast King, who was an expert in using that same martial technique. What Zion planned to do was let Percival gain the accumulation of that experience, allowing him to better understand how to use the skill as if he had used it for an entire lifetime. He planned to do the same thing for Anwar, and had already sent a letter to him, asking him to come and see him after a week. 13 needed his hero and his villain to be at the peak of their strength before the fight against the Magian Prince started. "Elyon, I'll borrow your power once more," 13 said softly as he remembered his host, who had failed to become the next Beast King due to the scheme that was devised by one of the villains, who wanted to get the position as well. Taking a deep breath, he placed his finger on his forehead and activated the rune magic that he had prepared for Taiga's arrival. The cores that he had placed around his body glowed one by one, allowing Zion to channel their power to his soul core and copy the memories of his host, Elyon. A few minutes later, he tapped Taiga's forehead, allowing the tigerkin to absorb the battle experience that his previous host had accumulated during his lifetime. Of course, he didn't add the part where Elyon was ambushed by over 200 beastkins, which led to his death. 13 sat cross-legged in front of Percival and monitored his condition. Although he believed that the transfer of memories was going to be smooth, he decided to stay just in case there were any complications. Fortunately, nothing of the sort happened, and after 6 hours, Percival opened his eyes. His gaze was no longer the gaze of an insecure brat. who still didn't know what he wanted to do in life. It will take you a few days to consolidate everything that you have learned, 13 stated. You are free to train and hunt wherever you please. But make sure that you don't venture too far from this base. I don't want you dying due to overconfidence. Do I make myself clear? Yes, master. Percival bowed his head respectfully, showing his sincerity. What Zion gave him was something precious, and although he didn't know that Elyon had a special relationship with 13, he believed that the person whom he had received memories from was someone who never gave up until the bitter end. Do your best, Taiga, 13 said as he patted the tigerkin's shoulder. You need to work hard for me for the next 3 years. Instead of being angry, Percival only smiled and nodded his head. For some reason, the name Taiga now had a special meaning in his heart, for it was the name that was given to him by his master, who, despite his powerless appearance, was someone who had taught him something that he could have only learned after living for more than 100 years. 13 looked at the ground, using a telescope, while sitting on the back of a giant hawk. Netero, who was seated beside him, was the one controlling the hawk from the sky. Let's land over there, Lord Netero. 13 pointed to the ground under them. Okay, Netero replied, and urged the giant hawk to descend to the ground. When they landed, 13 walked a few meters away before taking out a steel pole that was a meter long from his dimensional storage and made it fall on the ground. This steel pole had hundreds of runic symbols embedded in it, and was already charged with enough power to unleash its might, once 13 activated it using his rune magic. A moment later, Rocky emerged and picked the steel pole with its mouth before planting it firmly in the location that 13 had pointed. The Rocky Balboa even used its tail to hammer it into the ground, making sure that it was planted properly. A little deeper, Rocky, 13 said. We must not let anyone discover it. Netero watched with amusement as the 7-year-old asked the Rocky Balboa to bury the steel pole until it was a meter deep before covering it with dirt. Good. 13 nodded in satisfaction. Let's go to the next location, Lord Netero. The old man nodded, and once again asked his giant hawk to fly towards the sky. The armies of the Tigerkins and the barbarians were about to march out to the battlefield, so they needed to complete their preparations before the war officially started. 13 planned to deposit 24 steel poles in the Warzer Plains in order to cover a wide area that spanned for at least 5 miles in every direction. He even made sure that it would be enough to reach the beach where he believed Arundel's army would land when they arrived at the Valbera archipelago. But in order to maximize the power of the formation that he was creating, he would need the Magian Prince to arrive at its center, allowing him to trap the Magian Prince completely. If he activated the formation when Arundel was only on the edges of it, there was a high chance that the binding would not be strong enough to hold him completely, allowing him to escape. Although it was dangerous, 13 planned to lure the Magian Prince to the very center of the formation, where they would have a higher chance of getting the Endbringer to hit him. Half a day later, 13, Netero, and Rocky returned to their secret base to rest. What is our next move, Zion? Netero asked as they walked deeper inside the cave. We wait for the battle to start, 13 replied. We've already done everything in our power. Whether we succeed or not now depends on the actions of the Magian Prince. 13 wanted nothing more than to sleep for 2 straight days after everything that he had done. He hadn't gotten much sleep over the past week because they were running out of time. The boy knew that if he planted the steel poles a few days later, there was a high chance that he would be discovered by the scouts of the barbarian and Tigerkin armies. Because of this, he worked day and night to make sure that the formation he created was perfect. After telling Netero that he would take a nap, 13 headed straight to his room. However, he bumped into Anwer on his way, making the latter smile. Are you too deprived of sleep to see where you are going, Zion? Anwer asked as he looked at the 7-year-old, who had dark circles in his eyes. 13 eyed Anwer from head to foot and felt the changes in his presence. How is it? Do you think you can consolidate what you've learned before the war starts? It will be a bit tight, but I will manage, Anwer replied with confidence. I'm truly thankful for what you've done for me, Zion. I don't know how I'll be able to repay you. You can repay me by not dying, and by making sure that I also won't die, 13 answered before yawning. I'm going to sleep. Make sure to return to the Sumatran kingdom before the barbarian armies arrive. Anwar nodded. I was just about to do that. I just waited for you to return so I can say a proper goodbye. 13 hummed before raising his closed fist towards his sworn brother, making Anwar smirk. The two fists bumped each other before the 7-year-old entered his room to sleep. Percival, who was leaning on the wall not far from them, opened his eyes and looked at his stepbrother, who was about to leave their base. Don't die, okay, Percival said. If there is anyone who has the right to kill you, that person is me. Worry about yourself, Anwar replied as he walked past his stepbrother. Because if you die, father, mother, and Cleo will be very sad. The least you can do is make sure you survive this war for their sake. Anwar didn't even bother to look at Percival as he headed to the exit of the cave. His sworn brother had already told him what must be done, and he would see to it that he would do them without fail. Meanwhile, somewhere far out in the sea, Visego and Poca had been tasked to monitor the sea to look for signs of Arundel's army. Since the sea was vast, the two Poca-Pocos split up so that they would be able to cover a wider range. Due to the power of the wind spirits, and both being rank 3 monsters, they were able to travel far distances without getting tired. Poca, who was tasked to fly northwest, saw dark clouds on the horizon. After flying in that direction, she immediately sensed the overbearing aura from a being that stood at the apex of the world. The Poca-Poco immediately turned back and flew in the direction where Visego was scouting. Once the two of them reunited, Poca didn't waste time and told him about her findings. Let's go back, Visego said firmly. We need to tell Zion that Arundel is almost here. The two didn't waste another second and flew towards the Valbera archipelago. The moment of truth was almost at hand, and with it, the armies of the Tigerkins, barbarians, and the orcs started to move towards the Warzer plains, where they would all take part in a battle that would dye the ground red with their blood. Dozens of wooden wagons traveled alongside the giant ballista, which was being pulled by Giga and Rocky. Their destination was none other than the Furvis grasslands, where they would be hidden from the eyes of the armies of the barbarians, the orcs, and the Tigerkins. After napping for 3 hours, 13 ordered everyone inside the cave to mobilize and head to the camp that they had prepared in the darkest regions of the Warzer Plains. There, they would set up their grand ballista and hope that after a few days, the war would finally be over. The Wanderers were feeling restless because they could feel the tension in the surroundings. 13 hadn't told them that if everything went according to his plan, they would be able to return to Pangea once he had successfully lit the beacon of hope. Unfortunately, for that to happen, he needed Arundel to enter the trap he had prepared. But that was easier said than done. Knowing the Magian Prince, he would not actively participate in the war, and only send his forces at the right time, when both armies were weakened. But, according to his conversation with Paven, the old Tigerkin believed that Arundel seemed to be in a hurry to conquer the Valbera archipelago. So, if he felt that the war wasn't proceeding the way he wanted it to be, there was a high chance that he would personally make his move. 13 was betting on this event to happen because the only way for them to win the war was for Arundel to step onto the battlefield. If the monarchs of Pangea were to know that a Magian Prince would be coming, the 7-year-old believed that all 5 of them would turn tail and evacuate the place as fast as they could. And yet, mere wanderers, who were not even rookies, were forced to face such an existence. As much as possible, he didn't want any of the wanderers to get caught up in the fighting. So he had asked Rihanna and her hunting party to play a defensive role and protect their grand ballista from being targeted by stray members from the different armies in the Warzer Plains. 13, Percival, Adira, and Dixon would position themselves not far from the actual battlefield and see how things progress from their side. The grand ballista was already in place and was perched on a hill facing the Warzer Plains. Only Christopher, Brutus, Bruno, and the shaman from the Sacred Island were allowed to operate the grand ballista. The rest of the fighters were placed several hundreds of meters away from them, spread out like a fan, and ready to intercept anyone who happened to come close to their trump card. Since the grand ballista was hidden from view, 13 asked Rocky to load the end bringer on it, with Bruno and Gigachad helping to secure in place. Christopher, who was tasked to operate the Grand Ballista, couldn't help but blink repeatedly as he looked at the shiny ammunition in surprise. The 4 reinforced steel bolts that they had crafted as ammunition lay beside the Grand Ballista, ready to be used anytime. However, it didn't take long for Christopher to understand that the true ammunition that they were going to use was none other than the shining bolt that he was supposed to fire after seeing 13's signal. "Christopher, I know that this is a heavy responsibility, but I believe in you," 13 said as he patted his right-hand man's shoulder. "I don't want to pressure you, but know that if you miss, all of us are going to die." The chubby boy's face crumpled, looking as if he was about to cry. Clearly, he didn't want to be the person assigned to launch the Endbringer, which was the ultimate weapon against the Magian Prince. "Why, young master, I think you should reconsider," Christopher stuttered. "I think Rihanna will be a better candidate than me. I'm sure of it." "No," 13 shook his head. "At times like this, only you can do it." But young master, I really don't think I can do it." "You have to do it, Christopher. If you don't, you won't see your mother ever again." After hearing 13's words, the chubby boy clenched both of his fists. While it was true that he was scared to death of the Magian Prince, nothing scared him more than leaving his mother, who was still in a coma, in one of the hospitals of the Levinas family, behind. "Christopher, let me promise you one thing," 13 said before holding the boy's clenched fists. "If you succeed, I promise that I will cure your mother from her sickness when I return to Pangea. Although it might not be tomorrow, in a week, a month, or perhaps even a year, I promise you that I will make her open her eyes so that the two of you can hug each other again." Christopher didn't doubt Zion's words, for he had already done many things that he deemed impossible. He also understood that he was placed in the safest place possible so that he wouldn't have to worry about getting attacked by the armies that were about to face off against each other. The ones who were truly going to be in danger were none other than 13, Percival, Adira, and Dixon, who would head to the front lines alongside Giga, Blackie, Rocky, Hercules, the trolls, and the ogres, who would support his young master in his mission. Peyton and the rest of the Tigerkins would remain to protect the Wanderers and the Grand Ballista from harm. "I will not wish you luck, Christopher, because you won't need it," 13 said with a smirk. "You already have what it takes to succeed. Don't worry, no matter what happens, I will make sure that the beacon of hope is lit so that you and the others can go home. Before I forget, when the beacon of light is lit, stay for as long as you can. You might not see me again for a long time, so make sure to watch me closely using that telescope I gave you." When 13 descended the hill, Gerald looked at him with a solemn expression on his face before hugging the 7-year-old. "Don't die out there, son," Gerald said. "Your mother, Mikhail, Shasha, and Remy will be waiting for your return." "Got it, Pops," 13 replied as he gently patted Gerald's back. "Once you return to Pangea, take care of Christopher for me. He is my right-hand man, so make sure to talk to Grandma about it, okay?" Gerald chuckled. "Why should I talk about Christopher with Mother? Shouldn't I talk with my old man instead?" "That's because you and Gramps are the same," 13 answered. "Both of you are henpecked husbands. So, as long as Grandma agrees, Gramps will have no choice but to agree as well." Gerald shook his head helplessly before ruffling his unfilial son's hair, turning it to a mess. "May the winds of fortune be at your back," Gerald said softly. "Don't worry, Pops," 13 smirked. "It's just a Magian Prince. I'm sure Gramps will die out of envy knowing that he missed the chance of becoming a monarch by taking part in this mission." "Ha ha. Indeed, he will definitely feel constipated all day long once he hears of our legendary exploits," Gerald laughed. 13 joined him in his laughter for a few seconds before he set out to walk towards Rihanna and Harry, who were several meters away from them. "The two of you only have one mission," 13 stated. "Stay alive until the beacon of hope is lit. Rihanna, it has been fun going on an adventure with you. I hope that our paths will cross again somewhere here in Solterra." Rihanna became teary-eyed as she hugged the 7-year-old tightly. "Of course there will be plenty of opportunities to meet. We will meet again, definitely." 13, who had been hugged tightly, waited for a few seconds before tapping the young lady's back so that she could release him. Although she was reluctant, Rihanna finally let him go, allowing the 7-year-old to look at Harry with a solemn expression on his face. Zion, Harry was about to say something, but he was cut short when the younger boy raised his hand. Harry, there's only one thing I want from you, 13 said. Anything. As long as I can do it, I will give it to you, Harry replied. Attack helicopter. Can I take my words back? The scion of the Remington clan almost face-palmed after hearing 13's words. The younger boy was so firm in his goal to get an attack helicopter from his family, making him smile bitterly. Don't worry, 13 stated as he patted Harry's shoulder. I will have my attack helicopter by hook or by crook. So, wait for me to return to Pangea to cash out what you owe me, okay? Harry sighed before nodding his head. Fine, Harry said. I'll see what I can do. And I'll do the rest, 13 said with a devilish smile on his face. Attack helicopter get. The younger boy smirked as he walked towards Percival, Adira, Dixon, and the monsters who would fight alongside him. I will not sugarcoat things, 13 declared as he faced those who would accompany him in battle. There's a high chance that many of you will die. But know this, all of us are not fighting just for the sake of one race. We are going to protect the entirety of the Valbera archipelago. But know this, I have every intention of surviving this battle. So, all of you must also do everything in your power to survive. If there is anyone here who wishes to remain here, speak up now, and I will allow you to do so. This is your last chance. Your one and only chance, so think wisely. Everyone glanced at each other. A moment later, Blackie started to walk back towards the other wanderers, but 13 wrapped his arms around the Warzer Blackhound's neck and pulled him back, making the latter bark in surprise. Bastard, where are you going? 13 asked in annoyance. Hello, you are my mount. Do you think I'll allow you to go? Also, Rocky, don't burrow and hide underground. You're coming with me, period. Hercules, why are you hiding in those grasses? Do you think I can't see you? Come back here. The beasts, who didn't want to participate in the war, all groaned, hissed, and growled, making their intentions known. However, the 7-year-old wouldn't have any of it. Percival, Adira, and Dixon watched all of these with amused expressions on their faces. The 7-year-old gave everyone a chance to back down, but it seemed that he had no intention of letting anyone leave in the first place. In the end, 13 sat on Black's back and raised his closed fist in the air. What you do in life echoes in eternity. 13 shouted, To victory! To victory! High above the sky, Visago and Polka screeched as they circled around their master, whose unyielding gaze looked towards the place where a great battle was about to begin. A massive army marched from the Sumatran kingdom and crossed the strait that divided the territory of the Tigerkins and barbarians. Simultaneously, the barbarian and orc armies made their way to the battlefield where the Tigerkin army had stationed themselves. The one who chose this place was none other than General Stark, in accordance with 13's recommendation. The battlefield was a wide plain, allowing both sides to fight on even ground and giving both sides a fair advantage in the war. General Stark gazed in the distance as the Tigerkins played their drums of war. Replying to the thunderous booming sounds of their challenge were the war drums of the barbarians and the orcs, who had been allies for a very long time. Both armies were a mile away from each other, sizing each other up. Countless flags fluttered in the wind, representing the different factions of both armies. 13 and his group positioned themselves 2 miles away from the battlefield. The 7-year-old stood on top of a hill as he peeked through a telescope empowered with rune magic, observing the two armies from a distance. Visago, Polka, you already know what to do, 13 said to the 2 Poca-Pocos that were perched on Giga Chad's back. Both of your roles are important, so keep yourselves safe no matter what. The 2 Poca-Pocos chirped in acknowledgement before flying toward the sky. Visago flew toward the barbarian army, while Polka flew toward the Tigerkin army. Zion, what if they start to engage each other? Adira inquired. What'll we do then? We won't let that happen, Lady Adira, 13 replied. The moment these 2 armies clash, our mission will fail. No matter what happens, they must not fight each other unless Arundel makes his appearance. Visago and Polka had confirmed that Arundel's forces had already reached the island and were currently masking their presence, preventing anyone from detecting them. This was made possible with the artifact that Arundel was carrying. He wanted the two armies to weaken each other first before he sent his army for the kill, causing both sides to suffer countless casualties in battle. Little did the Magian Prince know that 13 already knew where his army had positioned themselves. The Tigerkins, barbarians, and the orcs didn't know that a game of chess with pieces numbering in the hundreds of thousands was about to begin. Both armies stood facing each other as their war drums boomed continuously, reverberating across the entire battlefield. "Your Majesty, why don't we take the initiative to attack our enemies?" Gale advised the barbarian king. "These Tigerkins might have forgotten who drove them off when they tried to invade our lands. Perhaps a wake-up call is in order." "That will be a foolish thing to do," Netero commented from the side. "Have you forgotten that Tigerkins are born stronger than humans? Even with the help of our orc friends, they must not be underestimated no matter what. Since you are itching for a fight, how about we do it the traditional way of sending our warriors to fight a one-on-one battle to spice things up? Gale, I think it will be best if you go fight to raise the morale of our troops. What do you say?" Although he didn't look like it, Netero was actually one of the most talented strategists of the barbarian race. He was the one who created the strategy to repel the Tigerkins when they first invaded their lands, allowing their forces to regroup and rally under one banner. Because of this, his words carried a lot of weight to the barbarian king. "A traditional battle sounds good," the barbarian king commented. "Go, Gale. Show these beasts what the barbarians can do." Gale frowned, but since the king had given his orders, he decided to obey his will. Netero watched him go with a calm expression on his face. Gale might only be a grandmaster, but that didn't mean that he wasn't proficient in fighting. He was a barbarian, so fighting was something that he was born to do. Riding a war horse, Gale charged alone and stood at the center of the plains, raising his voice to challenge the Tigerkins. "Who among you is brave enough to fight me?" Gale asked in a challenging tone. Paven, who recognized Gale, couldn't help but wonder if this was part of his counterpart's plan to trigger the war to begin. General Stark, who was in complete command of the army, was about to send one of his men to battle when a saber-toothed tiger, carrying a warrior, ran toward the battlefield. "Anwar," General Stark muttered before narrowing his eyes. His adopted son was only of the elite rank, while the barbarian who offered the challenge was of the Grandmaster rank. Although Tigerkins were born stronger than humans, there was still a 3-rank gap between Gale and Anwar, which would result in a bad matchup between them. But just as General Stark was about to call Anwar back, Rafiki, who was standing by his side, placed a hand over the general's shoulder. "Anwar is not a foolish child," Rafiki said softly. "He knows what he is doing, so trust him this one time." General Stark frowned, but he no longer proceeded to order Anwar to return. The Tigerkins, who recognized the boy as General Stark's adopted son, were confused. But since he came from the general's family, they thought that this was just part of the strategy that he came up with. "The young sure are fearless," Gale said when Anwar was only 15 meters away from him. "Have you come here to die, boy?" Instead of answering, Anwar dismounted from his saber-toothed tiger and ordered it to distance itself from him. Gale chuckled before he, too, dismounted and made his mount go away as well. Drawing his great sword from his scabbard, the barbarian took a fighting stance. He didn't mind fighting someone weaker than him since, in the end, it would allow him to raise the morale of the barbarians. Anwar, on the other hand, was not planning to win this duel. What he was planning was completely different, but he believed that it would not be a bad way to test how far his martial technique had improved. The martial technique, Emperor's Might, was more effective when facing off against enemies who were stronger than its wielder. This technique was made to surpass one's limits and allow them to put their lives on the line for the possibility of a victory. "State your name, boy," Gale stated. "Anwar Evander," Anwar replied. "And you are?" "Gale Scar," Gale answered. "The man who will teach you a lesson that you will never forget." Anwar took a fighting stance, which he had seen countless times inside his head and practiced nearly 16 hours a day ever since he gained the memories of the Lion King named Elyon. Although Lionkins and Tigerkins were of different species, there were also multiple similarities between them, making them two of the strongest races of the beastkins. As soon as he channeled the Emperor's might inside his body, his arms and legs were both covered with blazing dark flames, making the Tigerkin King and General Stark look at him in shock. King's might? The Tigerkin King thought as he scrutinized Anwar's technique. No, this is different from King's might. It is much more powerful. Only the royal family were able to use the martial technique King's might, because this was their closely guarded secret. However, after seeing that Anwar was able to use a martial skill that was quite similar, and perhaps even stronger than King's might, the Tigerkin King wasn't able to stop himself from looking at the boy favorably. He is Stark's adopted son, the Tigerkin King thought as he glanced at the general, who also had a surprised expression on his face. I guess he didn't know that his son knew how to use this formidable martial technique. The Tigerkin King pondered for a bit as his interest in Anwar grew. Unbeknownst to him, Anwar had deliberately taken the initiative to showcase his powers to the Tigerkin King to make the latter interested in him. He believed that after he saw how powerful this martial skill was, he would gain a status in the Sumatran kingdom, befitting of the technique he possessed. 2 miles away from the battlefield, the corner of 13th's lips curled up into a smile. Anwar really knows how to advertise his worth to others, 13 mused. But I also want to see just how far he has mastered the Emperor's might. Somewhere in the Warzur Plains, the Magian Prince looked at this little face-off with mild amusement in his face. He recognized the person fighting to be Gale, whom he had not been able to contact for the past several weeks. Arundel still had no idea what happened to him, but seeing that the other party was about to fight a one-on-one battle with an interesting Tigerkin, he decided to just watch for the time being and enjoy the entertainment that was taking place in front of him. Gale couldn't help but frown as he blocked and dodged Anwar's relentless assault. The black flames obscured his vision, but he was able to fight calmly against someone whose speed surpassed his own. "You might be fast, but your attacks will never reach me," Gale said with confidence as he waited for the right opportunity to strike. But whenever he thought that Anwar had left an opening, the Tigerkin would perfectly dodge the barbarian's attack before unleashing an attack of his own. The more the Tigerkin King saw Anwar's explosive might, the more the latter became precious in his eyes. If his life is ever in danger, go and rescue him, the king whispered to one of his personal guards, who was a champion. "He is a great prodigy of our race, so he must be kept safe at all cost." "Yes, your majesty." The royal guard bowed respectfully before moving toward the front of their army, giving him enough distance to save Anwar if ever his life was in danger. 13 was quite satisfied with the level of skill that Anwar was showing on the battlefield. Although there was a difference of 3 ranks between him and Gale, he was able to dodge every attack that the barbarian aimed in his direction. "What a show-off," Percival commented as he, too, looked at his stepbrother using a telescope. "Do you think you could do better than him?" 13 inquired out of curiosity. "If we were the same age, then yes," Percival replied. 13 smirked. "So you're using age now?" "It is a fact that he is older than me," Percival answered. "Well, I'm also younger than you, but you still lost to me in the end." Percival didn't have any words to refute 13's claim. Also, he couldn't possibly challenge the 7-year-old now, especially after recognizing him as his master. Percival understood that without the younger boy's guidance, he wouldn't be able to master the skill, Emperor's might, in such a short period of time. Right now, his current strength was all thanks to 13, and his face wasn't thick enough to think otherwise. The battle dragged on for nearly half an hour, with no clear winner in sight. Anwar was too weak to break past Gale's sturdy defenses, while Gale was not fast enough to land a hit on the Tigerkin's body. Even so, the morale of the Tigerkins was at an all-time high because one of their comrades was putting up a good fight against someone that was stronger than him. On the contrary, the battle lowered the morale of the barbarians, making the barbarian king very disappointed in Gale. He is bold enough to propose a head-on confrontation, and yet he's unable to dispatch a mere elite-ranked Tigerkin? What a disappointment, Netero said while shaking his head helplessly. This kind of person should not be allowed to join any strategy meeting. He is a disgrace. Netero's words were filled with contempt and disdain, making those who heard him nod their heads in agreement. The barbarians couldn't take this insult lying down, and some of them were itching to volunteer for the next battle in order to regain their honor and dignity. After more than half an hour of battle, the sound of a horn spread in the surroundings, which came from the barbarian side. This was the signal to retreat, which meant that Gale was to stop battling and return to their ranks immediately. Anwer, who was unleashing a flurry of blows earlier, backed away and crossed his arms over his chest. "You acted very cocky earlier, but you're just all bark and no bite," Anwer said in disdain. "If we were the same rank, your head would have been rolling across the ground ages ago." "I'll remember you." Gale glared at Anwer before sheathing his sword. "I won't remember you." Anwer sneered. "A loser like you is not important enough to remember." Gale was forced to endure Anwer's grating words as he whistled for his war horse to come to him. He then rode back toward the barbarians with a face filled with shame and regret, knowing that he had ruined their reputation. The Tigerkins cheered when Anwer returned to their ranks, with the king's guard even inviting Anwer to come with him to meet the Tigerkin king. Naturally, Anwer obeyed and followed the guard behind. This was his first step to gain some true influence within the Sumatran kingdom, allowing him to be recognized by everyone on the battlefield. "That Tigerkin isn't half bad," Arundel thought as he eyed Anwer from a distance. "I'll make him one of my slaves after I subjugate this land." The Magian Prince was always on the lookout for talented warriors to absorb in his army. Not wanting to face another defeat, the barbarians sent one of their accomplished warriors to fight. But just as General Stark was about to order one of his subordinates to face the barbarian challenger, Rafiki tapped his shoulder and pointed at himself. "Are you sure about this?" General Stark asked. "That barbarian is strong. He's a veteran." "Well, I'm also a veteran," Rafiki answered. "But you're a shaman. He will not give you time to prepare your spells." "Don't worry. I don't need time to prepare my spells." General Stark hesitated, but seeing the confidence in Rafiki's voice, he decided to let him go to fight. To everyone's surprise, the battle ended in less than 5 minutes, with Rafiki emerging as the victor. He didn't even take the enemy's life and allowed the other party to return to his army, making the Tigerkin's cheer reverberate in the surroundings. After 3 consecutive defeats, Netero ordered everyone to stop challenging their enemies and retreat a mile away from the battlefield. The barbarian king and the orc king knew that now was not the time to engage in a fight because the morale of their troops was at an all-time low. Netero proposed that they resume the battle the next day, when all of their troops had properly rested and recovered from their march toward the Warzor Plains. Of course, Gale vetoed this proposal, but no one listened to him. The barbarian king even ordered him to not attend any of their strategy meetings, making the city lord's face turn pale as a paper. Arundel frowned when he realized that the barbarians and the orcs didn't plan to engage the Tigerkins in a skirmish. Of course, he thought that the Tigerkins would use this opportunity to press their advantage. But General Stark calmed everyone down and ordered everyone to retreat a mile and make camp. No one opposed this order because they were all tired from their march to the battlefield. It was unanimously decided that the real battle would happen the next day, forcing Arundel to hold back his annoyance and wait for the 2 armies to fight the next day. When both armies retreated, Visago and Poca returned to 13's camp and reported their findings. "Good job, you two." 13 praised the 2 birds for completing their mission. Visago and Poca were both happy to receive the 7-year old's praises and ate their fill. Tomorrow was going to be more dangerous than today. If 13's guess was right, it would also be the day that the Magian Prince would finally lose his patience and order his army to strike. The night passed slowly as 13 laid down on Gigachad's back. Having nothing to do, he gazed at the stars in the sky and sighed. After being the system of countless hosts, he had seen countless starry skies, each one just as unique as the others. The Tigerkin army, the barbarian army, and the orc army had all retreated a mile away from the battlefield, with the intention of fighting each other when morning came. Anwer had done well in raising the morale of the Tigerkins, allowing Netero to convince the barbarian king and the orc king that it would be unwise to fight right now when their morale was low and their soldiers tired from their long march. Perhaps the two kings knew this as well, so they decided to agree to his proposal to retreat and make camp. Even though there was an eerie calm that hung in the air, it wouldn't change the fact that the situation could change at any point during the night. Because of this, they had set watchers to monitor the battlefield so that they could react immediately if something unexpected happened. Visego and Poca volunteered to do some scouting, but 13 forbade them to do it. The two Pocos need to get proper rest, because tomorrow will be the most critical day of all. The 7-year-old was certain that Arundel's short patience would not allow the battle to be postponed for another day. This also meant that a decisive battle would be happening in the morning, so he made sure that Visego and Poca were well rested, so they would be able to perform their duties. Tomorrow, things will end, 13 thought before closing his eyes. Truth be told, he was the most pressured of all because he needed to perform two important tasks to ensure their victory. The first one was to get as close as possible to Arundel, so that he could cast rune magic on his body. The second one was to lure Arundel to the center of the formation that he created. Both acts were incredibly dangerous, and without any form of help, 13 would not be able to survive in his face-off against the Mage and Prince. Just thinking of facing that kind of enemy with his frail human body was enough to make him wonder if what he was doing was worth it. But he knew that he had no choice but to do it, not only for his sake, but for his father's sake, whom he had roped in alongside him. Also, he had promised Christopher that he would send him back home to Pangea. If 13 still had his real body, dealing with a Mage and Prince would have been a piece of cake. Unfortunately, he didn't have that kind of advantage in his current lifetime, so he needed to put his life on the line for that one chance of victory. How many lives will be lost tomorrow? 13 couldn't help but think about who among his companions would perish when morning came. After pondering for a few moments, another sigh escaped his lips. I should just have named them all numbers, 13 thought. That way, I would not have much attachment to them. Unfortunately, it was already too late for it. Giga, Blackie, Rocky, Hercules, Percival, Adira, Dixon, and the others were beings who had formed connections with him. He didn't want any of them to die, but he had already prepared himself for the worst. There were things that were in his control and things that were outside of his control. This was something he understood too well after watching his hosts die one after the other. The pain he felt back then had forced him to question his purpose for existence. After he had enough, 13 decided to flip the table, started throwing punches, and rebelled against his father, the system god. Tiona, who sensed 13's anxiousness, crawled towards his head. She then laid her head on his forehead and used her tail to lightly caress the side of his left cheek, as if telling him that it was going to be fine. This action of hers made 13 calm down a bit, and after a few minutes, he was finally able to sleep. The night passed ever so slowly, and yet, when the sun rose up in the east, illuminating the world with its light, the 7-year-old felt as if he had only fallen asleep for half an hour at most. His body felt heavy, and yet he still got up to have a simple breakfast to prepare for the moment of truth. The other members of his group sported determined faces just like him and joined him in breakfast. 3 hours later, the armies of both factions started to move towards the battlefield, where a decisive battle was about to take place. Visego, Poca, you already know what to do, 13 stated. But no matter what happens, distance yourself from the location of the Mage and Prince. I'm sure that he won't hesitate to attack the two of you, so pay extra attention in his direction. The two Pocos nodded their heads before taking off to the sky. 13 briefed his people one last time before all of them took the telescopes in their possessions so that they could monitor the battle that was about to start. Sound the war drums, the barbarian king ordered, and his people obeyed. Raise the colors, the Tigerkin king commanded, and the flags of his army fluttered in the wind. General Stark, who was tasked to give the orders for today's battle, knew that he wouldn't have a valid excuse to stop his forces from advancing. Because of this, he steeled himself and gave the order to their warriors to form ranks in preparation for battle. Form ranks, General Stark ordered, and his order echoed across the battlefield. Form ranks, Netero gave the same order, making the barbarian berserkers step up to form the vanguard of their army. The strategist of the orcs also gave an order, ordering their forces to prepare for battle. With a heavy heart, General Stark gave the order to advance, making the Tigerkin army charge forward. "Today is the day we end all wars," General Stark shouted. "Show them the might of the Tigerkins. For victory! For victory!" The loud shouts and war cries of the Tigerkins reverberated in the surroundings, but the barbarians wouldn't allow them to get the upper hand in raising their army's morale. "Warriors of the desert, sons of heroes, the time for battle has come," Netero declared. "Fight for honor. Fight for glory. Fight for the clan. For the clan." General Stark's and Netero's gaze met each other before raising their hands at the same time. "Advance! Charge!" The vanguards of both armies broke free from the formation and charged against each other. But a minute before the two forces collided, something unexpected happened. The sound of two horns spread across the battlefield, forcing the captains that were leading the charge to order their people to stop completely. In the battlefield, following orders was a must, so after hearing the sound of horns, which signified a complete retreat, both vanguards made a U-turn and returned to their respective armies with dumbfounded looks on their faces. Meanwhile, General Stark and Netero both looked at their subordinates in confusion, especially those that were in charge of blowing the horns for battle. The people responsible for such tasks were just as dumbfounded as their leaders because none of them blew their horns and ordered their forces to retreat. Even now, the sounds of the horns could still be heard in the battlefield, making both sides wonder what was happening. High above the clouds in the sky, Visago and Poco were mimicking the sounds of horns, forcing both sides to make their retreat. 13 had blessed them with two abilities, and they were Mirror Stealth and Voice Amplification. Mirror Stealth allowed their bodies to reflect things around them, making them somewhat invisible to the naked eye. Amplification, as the name suggested, increased the range they could project their voices. With Zion's help, the two Pocos could send sounds in a 2-mile radius, allowing them to affect the outcome of the battlefield. General Stark and Netero, who could somewhat guess what was happening, couldn't help but be surprised by 13's strategy. But both of them understood that this was only delaying the inevitable. Not everyone was stupid, so they would think of countermeasures in order to reinforce the chain of command. But 13 knew this as well. Since he knew, he had already come up with his own set of strategies, which would make Arundel lose his patience and send his army to participate in the war. Arundel, whose forces were at least 5 miles away from the main battlefield, frowned as he looked at the current state of things. His army was well hidden, so no one had discovered their presence. But the thing that baffled him was the unexpected mishaps that were preventing the two armies from engaging in a full-blown war, which would dye the ground red with the blood of their warriors. He could understand what happened a day ago, when the two parties decided to retreat and rest for the time being. But now, things were different. Everyone was raring to go. He could smell it, he could see it, he could feel it. But what was stopping them from fighting? He had heard the horns due to his exceptional hearing, but failed to understand why they blew them. The two sides had still not clashed with each other, so sounding the retreat was a very strange move, no matter how he viewed it. "I guess I'll just watch a little more," Arundel thought as he signaled his army to prepare to advance. "But if they still don't fight each other within an hour, then it will be time for me to intervene." General Stark and Netero were doing their best to find the culprit who was sabotaging their war preparations. But no matter how they looked, and no matter how much they questioned the hornbearers, there were simply no leads for them to capture the one responsible for sounding the horns that signaled their armies to retreat. Of course, they knew that this was part of 13's elaborate plan, so they were riding on this reason to delay the war for as long as they could. But after half an hour, the soldiers had started to stir, with some of them growing very impatient. In the end, the kings of the barbarians, orcs, and tigerkins interfere with the chain of command. They personally stood on the front lines of the army, relieving General Stark and Netero of their commanding duties. The sounds of war drums once again rang out, and this time they were louder and more intense than usual. Both sides were trying to embolden their forces with words, in preparation for another clash. Just as the kings were about to give the order to strike, the sounds of horns once again rang out in the surroundings. The soldiers ignored these horns because they believed that someone was once again messing with the strategy they had in mind. But after hearing the horns properly, they all realized that these horns didn't belong to their army. That was the moment they sensed them. On the eastern side of the battlefield, countless figures could be seen. The ground trembled as they marched their way towards the Warzur plains, making the Tigerkin king, Barbarian king, and the Orc king look in their direction in surprise. About time they arrived, 13 sighed in relief after seeing the imposing army that had just arrived on the battlefield. Countless monsters of different sizes made their presence, known as the trolls and ogres, appeared on the battlefield. Christopher, who also saw the commotion from his location, made a fist pump because the allies that he had talked to had honored their agreement. 13 had asked him to go on an important mission, and that was to talk to the trolls and ogres and ask them to lend their hand. The troll and ogre shamans, who were also on the third island, sent letters to their respective kings to inform them of Christopher's arrival. Since the chubby boy was a brute tamer, the trolls and ogres felt a sense of familiarity with him, allowing him to have an audience with their kings. After receiving the letters from their respective shamans and Christopher's explanation, the two forces, who didn't get along with each other, marched their armies to join the war on the Warzur plains. Their presence on the battlefield made the barbarians, orcs, and tigerkins wary because they didn't dare underestimate the might of the troll and ogre armies. Knowing that now was a crucial time, the Tigerkin king ordered his mount to run towards the new armies that had arrived. He wanted to ask them their intentions, and if possible, he wanted to win them over to their side, allowing him to get an overwhelming advantage in this war. The barbarian and orc king, who also realized what the Tigerkin king was thinking, did the same thing and personally made their way to the troll and ogre armies and asked them their reason for coming. "We came here to fight," the ogre king declared, making the other ogres shout their war cries. "This war seems fun and we weren't invited, so we decided to crash it," the troll king stated. "It's your fault for not asking our permission to start this war." The barbarian king looked at the troll king with contempt. Since when did he need to ask the trolls and ogres for permission to fight against the Tigerkins? The Tigerkin king also shared the same thoughts as the barbarian king, making them frown. The orc king, however, only smirked because he knew this was already going to happen. Christopher didn't visit the trolls and ogres first. No, the one he first visited was the orc king and told him the real reason for this war. Of course, the Orc King didn't believe him completely, but since his shamans had verified the chubby boy's words, he decided to keep silent and see how things would unfold. And, just like Christopher had promised, the trolls and ogres had come to join the fight, which gave credibility to the teenage boy's words. "None of you are allowed to fight each other," the Troll King stated. "Anyone who attacks first will be attacked by us in the back," the Ogre King sneered. "Fight at your own risk." The Barbarian King and the Tigerkin army looked at each other in dismay. With such an imposing army planning to stab them from behind, which of them would dare to attack first? That was simply asking to be slaughtered from the front and the back. At that moment, a loud rumbling sound spread in the surroundings. Dark clouds covered the sky, blocking off the light of the sun and enveloping the world in darkness. Suddenly, and without warnings, countless giant fireballs descended from the sky and fell on the armies all across the battlefield. The fireballs were impartial, killing Tigerkins, barbarians, and descended from the sky and fell on the armies all across the battlefield. Orcs alike. When the Barbarian King, Tigerkin King, and Orc King saw this, they immediately returned to their armies in order to take command and save their people. The Troll King's and the Ogre King's armies were a distance away from the path of the fireballs, so they were not included in the ongoing onslaught from the heavens. Arundel had finally lost his patience, and, now, the true battle was about to begin. The Magian Prince no longer hid his presence, and ordered his army to advance. While this was happening, he summoned countless giant fireballs to descend on the barbarians, orcs, and Tigerkin armies in order to decimate their forces and break their formation. 13, who was standing on top of the hill, took a deep breath, for he knew that the moment of truth had come. "Hear me, Valbarians!" Arundel's shout reached everyone's ears. "The time of reckoning has come. Surrender or be annihilated." But before anyone could say anything, an equally powerful voice spread in the surroundings. "To arms, my brethren, brave tigerkins, barbarians, orcs, trolls, and ogres," 13 shouted, his voice being amplified by the steel poles that he had embedded on the battlefield. "Never fear, never surrender. We will all fight as one." General Stark and Netero looked in the direction where 13 was at and nodded their heads in understanding. "To arms," General Stark ordered. "Rally to me. To death. To death." The Tigerkin warriors heeded their general's call and charged alongside him. Raising his family's banner, General Stark took the initiative to charge at the incoming monsters that were coming from the west side of the battlefield. "Barbarians!" Arthas shouted. "Kill the monsters who invade our lands. Kill! Kill! Kill!" Arthas pointed his sword forward as he urged his war horse to run in the direction where the Tigerkin army was headed. The barbarians didn't hesitate and followed behind the brave warrior, who had decided to take the helm of their spear point. The Ogre King and the Troll King shouted his war cries as well before they, too, sprinted to join the battle. All the ogres and the trolls under their commands moved in unison. 13 watched all the powerhouses charge together before climbing on a Black's back. He then faced his people and gave them all a brief nod. "Do not engage too closely," 13 stated, "and don't be too far apart from each other. Lastly, don't die. We will survive this together." "Yeah," 13 then whispered something in Black's ears before he held onto his reins tightly. The Warzer Blackhound sprinted forward, joining the others in the battle of a lifetime. Arundel's army was composed of fire-type djinns and magents of all shapes and sizes. His territory was within a volcanic field, with over 100 active volcanoes located, so all of the monsters in his legion had a strong resistance to fire. Dozens of them were able to use flames as their main arsenal as well. Among these monsters were salamanders, fire wolves, flame wyverns, fire bats, hell chargers, horned demons, and imps. As a Magian prince, he had 2 rank 9 monsters who led his armies to battle: a fire dragon and a magma fiend. One was a djinn, while the other was a Magian. Together, they formed a formidable team that could destroy entire cities even if they were alone. These rank 9 monsters were usually the bosses of Tier 8 gates, while Magian princes and princesses were usually the bosses of Tier 9 gates. They were the so-called genocide-level gates, for no one had survived fighting against a Magian prince or princess and lived to tell the tale. When the Barbarian King, Tigerkin King, Orc King, Ogre King, and Troll King saw the 2 generals of Arundel's army, they couldn't help but narrow their eyes. "What a powerful pressure," the Tigerkin King said, his voice grim. "I'll deal with the fire dragon. Who is going to come with me?" "I will go with you," the Ogre King declared. "My ancestors killed a fire dragon. I want to experience it myself." The Tigerkin King and the Ogre King were both monsters, so they were stronger than regular humans. However, they were still a bit weaker than the rank 9 sovereigns in front of them. But it didn't matter. To begin with, they didn't even have a choice. "I'll deal with that magma fiend." The Barbarian King shifted his attention to the magma fiend, whose entire body was made up of magma. "I'll help," the Orc King stated. "I guess I'll join as well." The Troll King narrowed its eyes. Only the 5 of them had a chance of defeating the rank 9 monsters, leaving the rest of their army to deal with the small fries. But that was easier said than done. The fire dragon soared to the sky and unleashed a dragon's breath, turning the battlefield into a hellish inferno. Those who were unlucky enough to get hit by its breath attack didn't even have the chance to scream before their bodies burned to ashes. "Throw me," the Tigerkin King stated. "Ha ha, dumb tiger. I like," the Ogre King laughed as he grabbed the Tigerkin's body before spinning where he stood. A moment later, he tossed the Tigerkin King, Atlas, like a cannonball toward the fire dragon in the sky. Using his martial skill, King's Might, King Atlas turned into a golden meteor that collided with the neck of the fire dragon, making the latter roar in anger. Unable to reach the pesky tigerkin on its neck, the fire dragon had no choice but to spin in the air in an attempt to dislodge him. Unfortunately for the dragon, King Atlas' hold was firm, with claws piercing through the fire dragon's scale, securing his hold on its body. The Ogre King, Gamara, laughed out loud as he smashed the fire wolves that lunged at him en masse. Since the fire dragon was high up in the air, he would just start killing the small fries until King Atlas was able to think of a way to bring it down on the ground. To me, Arthas, who had also joined the battle, made a beeline towards his king, who was surrounded by hell chargers that looked like flaming unicorns. The barbarian king calmly dealt with them and sliced every monster within his sword range. The weapon he was carrying was a sacred treasure that was bestowed to the barbarians by Fornius hundreds of years ago. It was a mythical ranked weapon made from Fornius' own horn. It could deal serious damage even to a Magian prince. "Your Majesty, leave this to us," Arthas shouted. "Please, kill their generals first." King Iskandar glanced at Arthas and nodded his head in understanding. The city lord was leading the heavy infantry, which cut through the enemy ranks like a hot knife into butter. They were one of the most elite legions of the barbarian army, and dealing with the small fries wasn't a big deal to them. The Orc King, Velos, and the Troll King, Joram, followed behind the barbarian heavy cavalry and charged deep within enemy lines. While all of this was taking place, 13 and his people finally arrived on the battlefield. However, none of them engaged their enemies. Instead, they surrounded the 7-year-old, who planted a flag in the center of the battlefield. The flag was simple in design, with the symbol 13 in it, representing the number 13 in Roman numerals. This flag was the very center of the formation, and the place where they had to lure Arundel into no matter what. The 7-year-old had records of the Magian prince in his soul core, and what he discovered shocked him. The one who was given the title the Destroyer was a Magian prince who would never make an appearance on a battlefield unless he was 100% certain of his victory. Simply put, the Magian prince was either a very cunning Magian or a cowardly one. Depending on which one it was, 13 would have to employ a different strategy in order to bait the other party to appear in front of them. Scanning the chaotic battlefield, he could see that no one had managed to get the upper hand. The barbarians, tigerkins, orcs, trolls, and ogres were all hard, pressed in fighting Arundel's army, and the flames that had started to spread around them were making things worse. The magma fiend, Antarius, was constantly making it rain magma in its surroundings, melting the flesh of those who were unlucky enough to be hit by its wide-area attack that was hot enough to melt even armor. With flames and smoke spreading like wildfire, the momentum of the battlefield had shifted to Arundel's favor, making the Magian prince, who was watching the battle from afar, grin from ear to ear. He had detected 5 weapons on the battlefield that could potentially harm him, so he was biding his time to wait until his minions had weakened him enough so he could strike them down. The Barbarian King's sword, the Tigerkin King's gauntlets, the Ogre King's club, the Troll King's spear, and lastly the Orc King's axe. These 5 weapons, which had been given by Fornius to their ancestors, contained parts that came from the body of Fiend. It was for this reason Arundel wanted the barbarians and the Tigerkins to fight against each other so that their kings would die in battle. Only when he was certain that none of them would be able to resist would he make an appearance and finally end it all. Arundel had gotten his position not because he was a strong Magian prince, but because he fought his battles wisely. Little did he know that within the chaotic battlefield, a 7-year-old was busy thinking of ways to force him out of hiding, allowing them to carry out their plans to defeat him. Atlas, Velos, and Joram were finding it hard to approach the magma fiend, Antarius, because the latter was summoning giant fireballs left and right. If it were only them who had pushed deep within enemy lines, they wouldn't have any problems in dealing with this kind of attack. But they weren't alone. Their warriors were fighting alongside them, so they had no choice but to disperse the giant fireballs before they could land on their subordinates. This also made progressing to reach the enemy general extremely difficult. Aside from that, Arundel's army was also employing range attacks, forcing them to go on the full defensive. With every passing minute, more of their people died, forcing the three kings to advance forward and force the enemies to focus on them. The three made a beeline toward the magma fiend who was deep within enemy ranks. "Velos!" Iskandar shouted. "On it!" Velos replied and raised his axe. As if waiting for that moment, the barbarian king jumped in the air, smoothly landing on the orc king's axe. "We'll come and get to you soon," Velos roared before he spun his body twice. "Until then, do everything in your power to survive." Using his axe as a catapult, the orc king sent the barbarian king flying over Arundel's army, all the way to where the magma fiend was located. "Send me as well," Joram stated. "Good." The orc king once again took aim, as the troll king stepped onto his axe. With one mighty throw, the troll king flew over the fiendish army with his spear, sticking close to his body. When he reached the highest point of the orc's throw, he pointed his spear in the direction of the magma fiend and started to spin in the air before shooting in his enemy's location like a rocket. Antarius was currently busy fighting against the barbarian king. So although he saw the approach of the troll king from the corner of his eye, he didn't have time to stop his approach. A weapon created from the body part of a fiend was not something that the magma fiend could take head-on, so it resorted to use indiscriminate wide-area attacks that targeted friend and foe alike. But the barbarian king was a very patient person. He knew that the moment he closed the gap between him and his enemy, he would be able to cut the magma fiend and deal damage to it. The blade named Fornius Blade could cut through anything. It didn't matter if the enemy was a spirit, a creature made of gas, made of water, adamantine, or whatever. The moment the blade hit something, it would be cut regardless of its form. This made it one of the most dangerous weapons that Fornius had gifted the people of the Valbera kingdom, which granted them the means to protect themselves against calamities such as these. However, there were other mythical weapons in the battlefield, which included the Troll King's spear. This spear had the uncanny ability of letting its wielder fly in the direction where it was pointing at. However, the Troll King had employed a martial technique which optimized this feature. With its tip pointing at the magma fiend, the Troll King spun its body, creating a tornado that shredded everything in its path. Using the Troll King's attack as a shield, Iskandar charged toward the magma fiend with a determined look on his face. Despite Antarius' desperate attempt to keep them at bay, the power of the mythical weapons shone through, allowing his two enemies to cross the gap between them. While this was happening, the fire dragon, Hurakan, roared in anger because the tigerkin was like a leech that had stuck on its body. But that wasn't the reason why it was getting angry. King Atlas, both hands equipped with Fornius gauntlets, started to repeatedly punch the fire dragon's neck with his dominant hand and anchored himself with the other, making the latter scream in pain and anger. Fornius gauntlets were one of those weapons that ignored the enemy's defense. It was a weapon that specialized in using vibrations. The moment the gauntlet hits its target, it would send out powerful sound waves inside the target's body, which would rampage and attack it from within. In short, it was a weapon that dealt true damage regardless of what kind of enemy it was hitting. Out of desperation, the fire dragon decided to take a nosedive, descending toward the ground at great speeds. It planned to twist its body and slam its neck on the ground, crushing the pesky tigerkin that was repeatedly hitting its neck until now. "Ha ha! My turn!" The Ogre King, who was paying close attention to what was happening in the sky, laughed as it summoned its bone club and ran in the direction where the fire dragon was about to fall. The Ogre King wasn't as dumb as the other ogres, and he was truly proficient in the art of war. It made sure to run within the fire dragon's blind spot, allowing it to approach it without detection. When the fire dragon was about to accomplish whatever it was planning to do, the Ogre King stomped its right foot on the ground and jumped high in the air with its bone club ready to strike. Bone-breaking smash! The Ogre King roared as he unleashed a powerful attack, directly targeting the side of the fire dragon's body, changing its descent and causing it to crash on the ground. The moment the Gamara's attack landed, the Tigerkin King immediately jumped off from the fire dragon's body so that he wouldn't be affected by the Ogre King's devastating strike. "Good job," King Atlas said as soon as he landed on the ground. "Ha ha!" The Ogre King laughed. "Is it dead? Due to the dust cloud that spread in the surroundings after the fire dragon crashed on the ground, they were unable to confirm if their target was indeed dead. "There's only one way to find out," King Atlas replied before running toward the dust cloud with the intention of attacking the fire dragon while it was still down. Gamara liked this plan very much, so it ran alongside the Tigerkin King, with its bone club ready to smash its opponent to oblivion. Everywhere 13 looked, only flames and carnage could be seen. The flag he had planted beside him fluttered amidst the mayhem, standing tall and proud. A few minutes later, the screech of a hawk reached his ears, which made him glance in a certain direction. "He's there," 13 thought, "but he's still too far." Visago had finally pinpointed Arundel's location, but he was 10 miles away from the center of his formation. Knowing the Magian Prince's nature, the 7-year-old knew that if he wanted to lure the beast to his trap, he needed to entice it first. The question was, how? Arundel would only take action once he was certain that victory was 100% his. Having thought of this, 13 immediately started analyzing, thinking what could potentially threaten a Magian Prince, when he was the most powerful being in the Valbera archipelago at the moment. The Barbarian King, Tigerkin King, Orc King, Ogre King, and Troll King were only thrones. They were no match against a Magian Prince, and yet Arundel still hadn't made a move, which surprised him. Using his soul core to gather information, the boy sat on Black's back in silence while his team defended him from any and all possible attacks that targeted his life. Percival, Adira, and Dixon were the most active of all, while Giga Chad stood close to his master, standing on 2 legs like a bear ready to strike. They noticed that Zion seemed to have fallen into a trance, making him extremely vulnerable at the moment. Fire bats and hell chargers had targeted the boy, but they were all sent flying or killed by the boy's protectors. They couldn't even touch a single strand of his hair. Finally, after 10 grueling minutes, 13 snapped back into focus, making him narrow his eyes. "Fornius weapons," 13 muttered. Arundel is afraid of the weapons that were crafted from the fiend's body part. The 7 Celestials and the 7 fiends were the strongest existences in the world of Solterra. They were the only beings that kept the Magian Princes and Magian Princesses in check, preventing the latter from taking over the entire world. Gritting his teeth, 13 issued his orders. "We need to get near the kings." 13 ordered. "Follow me." The boy urged Blackett to run toward the part of the battlefield where the Tigerkin King and Ogre King were battling against the fire dragon, Hurricane. He didn't dare go near the magma fiend because the bulk of Arundel's army was protecting it. The fire dragon king had crashed a good distance away from the main battlefield, but the danger of going to that place was just as high. The fire dragon was a rank 9 Jinn sovereign, boasting an incredibly strong body that was near impenetrable. Fortunately, the Tigerkin King's gauntlets ignored any kind of defense, sending shock waves through any target he punched, attacking them from within. Although 13 already had a clue of what to do, he was still uncertain about how he would be able to do it. The only way for Arundel to make his move was if the Fornius weapons disappeared from the battlefield, which would completely remove any threats to the Magian Prince's existence. But there was one big question. How would he do that? He didn't believe that the kings would toss their weapons aside. Doing so was no different from suicide, especially since they were dealing with existences such as the fire dragon and the magma fiend. Since that was the case, there was only one thing that he could do. Arundel's 2 generals must die first. Only by eliminating these 2 threats would he be able to convince the kings to listen to his proposal. When they finally arrived at the scene, they saw the Ogre King fighting the fire dragon in close combat. The Tigerkin King, on the other hand, was being a pest, repeatedly punching the joint of the dragon's right wing with the intention to break or remove it completely. The Fire Dragon King was a true menace, especially since it could fly to the sky. They were lucky the first time. Even they didn't expect that the Tigerkin King would be able to reach the dragon and deal it a blow using Fornius weapon. Since its plan to dislodge the Tigerkin King didn't work, it decided to dive toward the ground, wanting to smash the pesky insect to a pulp using its body. Unfortunately for it, the Ogre King was waiting for that opportunity to launch an attack, which made its situation more troublesome. At the hands of experts, Fornius weapons were truly deadly, disregarding the difference in ranks. It was like equipping a 5-year-old with a handgun, making even adults run away in fear of getting accidentally shot by it. Since the bone club of the Ogre King wasn't exactly a slashing weapon, but a bludgeoning weapon, the dragon scales that protected the dragon were unable to minimize its damage. Every time the Ogre King smashed the fire dragon's body with its bone club, the part that received the blow would get deformed, eventually shattering the dragon scales from impact. The Tigerkin King, on the other hand, was savage and relentless, unleashing a flurry of attacks on the dragon's wing, preventing it from flying away. The fire dragon has a bad matchup with its opponents, 13 thought as he watched the battle from a distance. The two weapons make its dragon's scales useless. But despite all of this, the fire dragon was still very much alive and fighting tooth and nail with its enemies. After all, it was still a rank 9 sovereign. If an overlord was considered as a field boss monster, a sovereign was equivalent to a world boss monster. That kind of monster would not go down easily, even if it was receiving a lot of damage from the two thrones that were mitigating its attacks with their powerful weapons. Half a minute later, the Ogre King was sent flying when the fire dragon managed to lash it with its tail. Although it had pushed the formidable monster away, it had lost the ability to fly because the Tigerkin King managed to break the joints of its right wing. 13 and his subordinates, who were watching the battle from afar, didn't dare come close because a single mistake would cost them their lives. Tiona, who was coiled around 13's neck, hissed, informing her master about something. After hearing what his beast companion said, the 7-year-old ordered his protectors to stay behind as he ordered Blackie to get as close as they could get to the two kings so that he could pass a message to them. A message that would allow them to gain an upper hand against their opponent, which might lead to their victory. As 13 and Blackie charged toward the Ogre King, who had been sent flying by the fire dragon earlier, he couldn't help but glance at his status page to see his 6th trial. 6th trial. Light the beacon of hope. Reward. You'll be given the option to ask for whatever reward you want. However, this reward doesn't extend to the restrictions that are placed on your body. Even if you wish for them to be removed, it will not happen. So, think of the next best thing as your reward for completing this monumental task. P.S. As long as the reward you wish for is within reasonable bounds, it will be granted without fail. 13 had long become paranoid of missions with a reward like this. Simply put, if the 7-year-old could light the beacon of hope, he would be given a wish. But the last time he asked for a wish, this wish was not granted to him. Because of this, the system of cannon fodders had developed trust issues when it came to rewards like these. Pushing these thoughts to the side, 13 finally reached the location of the Ogre King, who had just managed to prop himself up from the ground. Mr. Strong Ogre, there is something I want to say, 13 shouted as Blackie stopped a few meters away from the Ogre King, who could easily turn the two of them to meat paste. Are you food? The Ogre King asked. I'm not hungry. Come back later. No, I'm not food, 13 replied. There's just something I need to tell you. Speak, the Ogre King said before it shifted its attention on the fire dragon, who had succeeded in landing a blow to the Tigerkin King's body, sending him flying. I have a friend that can help, but you need to create an opportunity for him to strike. 13 explained. Since the 7-year-old knew that ogres weren't really that smart, he explained his case as simply as possible, making the Ogre King nod its head. Okay, the Ogre King agreed before running toward the fire dragon with a roar filled with defiance. 13, who had managed to convey his plan to the Ogre King, asked Blackie to take him to the Tigerkin King, who had suffered an injury after getting hit by the dragon's attack. Fortunately, King Atlas had a robust body and a powerful regeneration ability, so he only needed a few minutes to fully recover and fight the fire dragon once again. What happened between the human boy and the Ogre King didn't escape his attention, so when the 7-year-old ran in his direction, he decided to give the boy a chance to speak to him. Your Majesty, I am Anwar's sworn brother. I have a plan that can help defeat the fire dragon, 13 said. Speak, the Tigerkin King replied. If this were a normal time, he wouldn't even bother to discuss anything with a human, especially a human child. But after hearing that he was Anwar's sworn brother, he decided to give him a chance. When he asked General Stark's adoptive son to talk to him, Anwar mentioned that he had a dependable sworn brother. Despite his young age, held great wisdom that was comparable to those older than him. As early as that time, the Tiger King became curious about the person whom Anwar was praising in front of him. After hearing the boy's plans, the Tiger King couldn't help but smirk. It seems that Anwar is right. King Atlas smirked. Very well. Let's see if this plan of yours will work. Although he still hadn't fully recovered from his injury, he had recovered enough strength to join the Ogre King in its fight against the fire dragon, whose dragon breath grazed the strong monster, who refused to back down against it. The moment the Tiger King rejoined the fight, the fire dragon found himself being attacked in its blind spot, forcing it to go into the defensive. Although its body was strong, King Atlas was using sound waves to target its organs, which resulted in internal bleeding. At first, the effect wasn't that noticeable, but the longer the battle lasted, the slower the movements of the fire dragon became. Losing its ability to fly, it was forced to go into the defensive and use everything in its arsenal to fight the two kings, whose weapons were doing a good number on its body. Still, the injuries that the two kings were receiving weren't light. For each blow the fire dragon took from them, they received equal, if not greater, damage to their own bodies. As the battle progressed, these injuries became worse to the point that merely standing up to dodge the dragon's attacks was a monumental task. The Ogre King had a huge gash on its chest, where blood flowed steadily, and its left arm was also bent in an unnatural angle. Even so, its ferocity and tenacity held strong, raring to fight the fire dragon until it drew its last breath. The Tiger King was also in a very bad shape. During one of their clashes, the fire dragon managed to make a counterattack and bit off King Atlas' left arm, lowering his fighting ability by half. With only his dominant arm remaining, the Tiger King knew that it was only a matter of time before they lost the battle. But just as the fire dragon thought that it already had this fight in the bag, the ground under its feet gave way, making its body fall into a 20-meter deep pit. The two monsters, who were waiting for this moment, immediately targeted the rank 9 monster, who didn't know what had happened. Rocky knew that he wouldn't be able to deal great damage to the fire dragon, so it did the only thing that it could do. It tightly coiled its body around the fire dragon's tail and pulled it downward, holding it in place. The Ogre King, King Gamara, and the Tiger King Atlas, didn't hesitate to jump into the hole and pummel the fire dragon's head with everything they had. The fire dragon, who could still move its arms, was about to crush the two insects that were messing with it, when a pair of clawed hands grabbed its draconis arms from behind and held them in place. Cranky appeared and bit the fire dragon's neck, which had been seriously injured by the Ogre King's bone club and the Tiger King's gauntlets, refusing to let go. After consuming the body and the Jin core of the rank 6 Overlord Hyena, the purple-furred honey badger underwent a mutation, transforming into a devil-horned honey badger, which was a rank 7 sovereign. Cranky knew that the only choice it had was to fight alongside 13 or die and be consumed by Arundel and his subordinates. The funny thing was that, due to its fear of the Mage and Prince, it had gained a similar skill to Rocky and Tiona, allowing it to dig through the ground without leaving any traces. However, this ability was enhanced further because Devil, Horned Honey Badger, could now create sinkholes in the ground and bring any of its targets toward it. So, with its newly gained strength, it decided to tag team with the Ogre King and the Tiger King to defeat the Fire Dragon. 13 made sure that the two kings wouldn't attack Cranky and assured them that it was their ally. Because of this, they focused on just beating the crap out of the Fire Dragon, who suddenly decided that enough was enough. Out of desperation, it then opened its mouth to unleash a dragon's breath at point-blank range, not caring about the aftermath. But that was a huge mistake. As soon as it opened its mouth, Giga Chad's Giga Destroyer blasted straight into its mouth, making it choke. But that was the least of its worries. A spark was ignited in the fire dragon's throat, causing Giga Chad's stink spray to combust inside the fire dragon's body, mortally wounding the rank 9 sovereign. One last push. 13 shouted. Kill. Sure thing, son. Before 13 could even react to the voice from behind him, Gerald jumped down the hole with his hammer ready to strike. Golden flames blazed around the Grandmaster's hammer, augmenting its power to devastating levels. Hammer for all seasons' final form. Gerald roared as he unleashed the martial technique's strongest killing blow. Fortress Breaker. With a blow powerful enough to destroy the defensive walls of a fortress, Gerald's hammer smashed against the fire dragon's head like a meteorite. A cracking sound reverberated in the surroundings, which signaled the death of one of Arundel's generals. The mighty fire dragon died after getting gangbanged by desperate people and monsters, whose only desire was to live and return to their families who were waiting for them back home. The light in the fire dragon's eyes was extinguished after it drew its last breath. It had come to the Valbera archipelago thinking that no one in it would be able to kill it, and this mentality had led it to its doom. Before anyone could even sigh in relief after the great battle ended, the body of the fire dragon shuddered as Cranky pierced its chest with its sharp claws with the intention of digging its beast core. The greedy devil-horned honey badger had every intention of consuming the rank 9 sovereign's beast core, allowing it to once again grow stronger. The Ogre King and the Tigerkin King, who also had the same idea, were immediately intimidated when the devil-horned honey badger glanced in their direction with the hands off or I'll bite you gaze. Cranky, I don't mind if you eat the beast core, but share the blood and flesh of that dragon, 13 stated. If your allies don't become strong, the Magian Prince will turn you into a roasted honey badger and eat you. The honey badger wasn't his servant, nor his friend. They were merely allies by necessity, so he could only ask it to share the kill to the others. Cranky made an impatient clicking noise as if telling the boy to not disturb it, because it was still busy digging through the dragon's chest to get its Jinn core. Fortunately, half a minute later, the honey badger pulled the thing it wanted from the sovereign's body. It was a glittering purple core that was at least a meter tall. Just a glance was enough to tell everyone that it contained great power, which could potentially elevate any of them to the next rank. However, Cranky decisively dug a hole and made himself scarce, looking for a safe place to eat its prize. Everyone, eat and drink the dragon's blood, 13 ordered. We don't have much time. Giga Chad and Blackie didn't hesitate to bury their faces on the hole that Cranky had dug on the dragon's chest to get its Jinn core. The two beasts slurped the dragon's blood and bit its flesh like monsters who hadn't eaten in a month. Monsters didn't only raise their ranks by eating cores. They also become stronger by consuming monster meat because it was very nutritious as well. The Ogre King and the Tigerkin King didn't hesitate to eat the dragon's flesh as well, increasing the regeneration rate of their bodies, allowing their injuries to heal faster. Go, Tiona, 13 whispered. Eat the dragon's brain. Ignore everything else. The black snake nodded and crawled towards the dragon's mouth so that she could chew her way to its brain. The skill predation didn't only work on monster cores. It was also activated by eating monster meat, but the chances of gaining a skill was comparatively lower than eating a beast core. But since Cranky had already taken away the grand prize, they were forced to eat the breadcrumbs that were left behind. Gerald, on the other hand, was looking at the space in front of him with a silly grin on his face. 13 didn't need to be a genius to understand why his father was acting this way. Since he was the one that had dealt the killing blow to the dragon, it was highly possible that he had acquired something good from it. After all, what he killed was a rank 9 sovereign. Even if he didn't gain its avatar, gaining an item from such a creature would certainly be at the peak of the gold grade rank. But seeing how happy Gerald was, a possibility appeared in 13's head. Pops, what rank did you get? 13 asked. Mythical, Gerald replied with a smug smile on his face. Nice. Ha ha ha. What 13 didn't know was that due to how special this mission was, the Laplace demon and the One had unlocked a special feature for all wanderers participating in this mission. They had removed the rank limiter, allowing those who participated in this battle to readily equip or summon any item or avatar that they gained from killing jinns or magians, regardless of its rank. Gerald was only the Grandmaster rank, and it was impossible for him to use any mythical equipment because only thrones and monarchs could use them. But because the rank limiter was removed, he was now able to use equipment that he should be unable to use due to his low rank. While the father and son duo were feeling happy with their spoils, Giga Chad's and Black's bodies started to glow faintly. webnovel.com. Red flames blazed from Giga Chad's claws, and a flame mark appeared on its forehead. It had undergone a mutation and had become a rank 4 alpha monster, who went by the name Blaze Chad Skunk. Similar to what happened to Giga Chad, Black's feet had also started to blaze. But unlike the Chad Skunk's red flames, Black's flames were purple. Its eyes had also turned purple, and its body had grown by 2 feet. It had evolved into a rank 4 monster called Nightmare Blackhound. After the two left, Rocky also started to feast on the dragon's flesh and blood, making it undergo an evolution as well. From a Rocky Balboa, it now evolved into a Magma Balboa and jumped to a rank 6 alpha monster. King Atlas and King Gamara didn't have a jump in rank, but their injuries both healed at an incredible rate. It was as if they had drunk an elixir, making the injuries they sustained in battle heal completely. The dragon was simply too large to be devoured, so after they had their fill, they left the hole and climbed up together. Gerald looked at this scene with itchy hands because, if possible, he wanted to take the remains of the rank 9 sovereign back home, so that he could craft an item from it. However, he didn't have a way to transport such a large creature, making him feel depressed. 13, on the other hand, wasn't troubled by this problem because he had a way to get the dragon corpse and put it to good use. Rocky, store the dragon's corpse inside you. 13 ordered. The Magma Balboa happily obeyed the 7-year-old's order and devoured the giant dragon, storing it inside its mobile fortress. Gerald looked at the Magma Balboa, then at his son, before giving Zion the thumbs up. "Good job, son," Gerald said. "Now we can make a killing when you return to Pangea." "Pops, go back," 13 replied in a solemn tone. "Thank you for helping me, but this is as far as you can go." The 7-year-old then mounted Black's back, who had now become stronger and faster than ever before. "Son, how can I possibly leave you at this point?" Gerald asked. "Pops, I promised Mom that you would return home safely," 13 insisted. "You should stay with Christopher and just guard our secret weapon." "You want me to leave you as you face that Magian prince?" Gerald asked with a sneer. "Not happening, son. Both of us are going back together." 13 glared at his father, who glared back at him. He could see Gerald's determination, but he really didn't want his father to gamble with his life, especially since he didn't have to do it. But before he could say anything, Rocky spat Tiona out, who didn't hesitate to crawl up Black's body and once again return to her rightful place beside her master. There were no apparent changes that could be seen in her appearance, but 13 could tell that she was very happy. This only meant one thing. She learned an ability. 13 thought, "This is good." Just as the boy was about to ask his beast companion what kind of skill she had learned, the ground shook, which was similar to what happened during a volcanic eruption. 13 and Gerald immediately gazed at the battlefield where an explosion that caused a red fiery mushroom to soar up towards the heavens was located. Suddenly, a powerful presence descended across the battlefield, making Giga Chad and Blackie whimper. "He's here," 13 muttered. Arundel finally made his move. The 7-year-old didn't know if he should be happy or not due to this realization. He was happy because Arundel had finally appeared, which meant that he didn't need to act recklessly in order for him to enter the battlefield. However, this could also not bode well for them because of one simple reason. Arundel only made his move when he believed that he had a 100% chance of winning. Since he had made his appearance, 13 couldn't help but shudder as he urged Blackhead to run in the direction where the Barbarian King, Orc King, and Troll King were fighting the Magma Fiend, Antarius.